your background is in cannabis cultivation.
Yep.
How does that lead you into this path with Bitcoin?
Well, I got into cannabis cultivation at 24 years old. And this dream come true moment for me is a nightmare. This is an existential crisis. And that led me to Bitcoin.
A business license is when the state revokes your right to do something and then sells it back to you.
That's so well said. Cannabis performs a process called apoptosis, where it can send in part of the constituents into the cancer cell, kill the cancer cell, and cause no damage to any of the cells around it.
Maybe that's why it's so hard to describe as well, right? I can imagine in the early days of the wheel, maybe there was a wheel maximalist.
Right.
It was like,
it's funny.
Guys, you don't get it.
Trust that what you're experiencing is exactly what you need to be experiencing, and that kind of can remove that discomfort around whatever challenges that we experience.
But why is Bitcoin doing that? Why is Bitcoin giving us that metacognitive pressure to step back?
I try to make sure that I'm not falling into that fear-based, cortisol-induced state of being or way of thinking, because I at least am aware of the fact that it's possible that by feeling that way and thinking that way that I could bring myself more of that.
So you're just telling me that the word stack, which is your alias is stacks.
Yep.
This word has a lot more meaning than maybe most people may realize initially. Has a lot to do with your background, has a lot to do with Bitcoin. So like, could you start to unpack that again? Because there seemed to be a lot of meaning, a lot of pregnant meaning in that word, as we were getting into how nature evolves and layers and whatnot. Yeah.
When I first started making content and putting it on Twitter, before I did, I put a lot of thought into what kind of risk I'd be taking. Do I want an alias? I'm definitely so enthralled by Bitcoin and passionate by Bitcoin. I wanted something Bitcoin related. Mm-hmm. So I put a lot of thought into it, came up with, Eric V Stacks. And ironically, that's also a play on cannabis cultivation, because when you induce flower, you're taking the plant from a vegetative state and mm-hmm. inducing a generative or flowering state. And as the plant transitions, it's stacking nodes, bud sites. Mm-hmm. And so it's referred to as a stack. So when you're inducing flower, you want to create, a tight and robust stack.
And so is that like, when you say transition from vegetative to flowering state, does that mean from like an inert state to a reproductive state? Like what is the plant doing?
Pretty much. Yeah. It's going from the state in which it's going to be continuing to grow and grow and grow to get bigger like it does in the springtime, to a generative state where it's going to be putting out flower sites so that it can be pollinated by the male plant and then produce seeds to then reproduce. So that generative queue, which is typically in nature, it's going to go in springtime. You're going to have, depending on where you are relative to the equator, you're going to have much more sunlight during the day than you do dark. So you can have anywhere from 13 hours daylight to 11 hours dark at the equator, and then the further north you go in spring and summer, you're going to have really long days and short nights. And to induce flower, you're going to go from 17 to 20 hours of light with a 6 to 4 hour dark period to a 12 to 12 period of time. 12 hours dark, 12 hours light, and that signals to the plant that the season has changed, and then now its physiology then changes as a result of that.
God, so you're hacking its circadian rhythm
totally
to get it into the productive phase that you want it to be in. And so what the bud that's actually growing then what does that have to do with reproduction?
So as the flower starts to grow, it's growing bracts, which are like calyxes, and then pistils, and then it produces resin. The resin protects that flower site from UV light. Okay. And then it's also the part of the plant that accepts pollen from a male plant. And you have female plants and male plants. And so the male plant, when it goes into flower, as a result of the photoperiod changing, it produces pollen. The pollen then floats through the air and pollinates the female flower. And then inside of that flower, seeds are produced. And then the bud in nature would then fall onto the ground, and it has all of this biomass around it that is going to decompose, and it'll overwinter. And then when the conditions are right, the next spring, that seed will germinate and the new plant grows.
So it's a cocoon of sorts.
In some ways, yeah.
Or like a placenta or something, right?
Like a placenta.
Wow.
Yes.
I had no freaking idea. So so people that are smoking weed are smoking plant placentas.
Kind of, yeah.
Wow.
It's the reproductive organ of the plant.
Yeah, but so the placenta, I mean, this is the thing that houses all the nutrients and vitamins and minerals and right for the newborn offspring.
Pretty much, because when the flower drops to the ground, then what'll happen is the soil ecology, the mycelium and the microbes that live in the soil will start to decompose that plant material, and it'll create a little fertile pocket around all of those seeds.
Yeah.
And then next season, those seeds will sprout.
Wow.
And it's actually pretty wild. Like, people will throw out seeds or buds or whatever on their farms. And then the next year you'll see like little seeds popping, little seedlings popping out. In Humboldt County, I've actually seen personally seeds grow, little cannabis sprouts in the spring growing out of the sidewalk cracks. Yeah.
That's hilarious. What is it about? So, this is a reproductive feature of a plant. Why? Because as my understanding is humans have a cannabinoid. Is it endocannabinoid system? Is that what it's called?
That I'm not sure. I know we have cannabinoid receptors in our brain.
Okay. That's what I was going for, I think. What is the relationship do you think between, why are we so wired to use these plants for purposes like this?
I'm not exactly sure, but the first thing that comes to mind is there's some sort of evolutionary symbiosis taking place there. We are made up of this similar, building blocks of everything else around us.
Yeah.
So I think that there's some sort of harmonious symphony that kind of taking place in nature. And I think that we often, in the areas that we live in, there are things, plants, animals that grow around us that give us the things that we need to sustain ourselves. And now cannabis is a really interesting one. And some people kind of refer to it as being like not of this world. There's something very spiritual and metaphysical about it and something unique about cannabis. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but there's something there. There's been a long-standing relationship between humans and cannabis for a long, long time.
It's is there ceremonial, religious, spiritual background with, like, people have been using this in different traditions for a long time?
Yeah, right? I'm not too sure.
Today it's classified as just a drug, Scheduled 1 drug. This is bad, but humans in general have been using, well, not just cannabis, by the way, master plants, which they're often referred to in the plant medicine community for a long time, right? They've been using different plant medicines and different ceremonies for many, many, many generations. So you think then there is some co-evolutionary dance occurring between human and plant? Yes,
and cannabis, amongst other plants, they have an effect on our consciousness. And so there is something there where for thousands and thousands of years, people have been using plants, psilocybin mushrooms, to alter their state of being. And for me personally, I can say, I've ingested copious amounts of cannabis over the years, being a cannabis producer for as long as I have. It has a deeply, like, I like to refer to it as like a modulatory effect. It's like an adaptogen. I find that if I'm too micro-focused and I'm stuck in the details of whatever's happening in my life, I find that the cannabis helps me to zoom out. Or the opposite can take place. The inverse, where if I'm like really too macro-focused and I'm kind of struggling to get it together and pay attention to some of the details on the micro level, it'll help me focus in that sense. And really, for the most part, it helps for me personally, and I can see this in other cannabis users, mitigate the discomforts of life. Life is hard. We have to do things that are challenging. And so I think that's why initially when cannabis becomes legal in any jurisdiction, it goes from totally illegal to medical. That seems to be more socially acceptable. But the reality is that medical use and recreational use is still just cannabis use, and the product at the end of the day is the same. Yeah. And it really is very benign, in my opinion. You know, you don't hear about people ingesting cannabis and getting into bar fights. No. You don't hear about somebody ingesting cannabis and getting into a major traffic accident. Yeah. You might hear about somebody smoking weed and then sitting in their car for 3 hours because they're too high and they can't go anywhere. Yeah. You know, or they needed to take a nap, or they got that feeling of anxiety, or they're hungry or whatever.
Yeah, Chris Rock, what did he say about cannabis? The side effects are happy, hungry, and sleepy. Yeah. It's like, it really does seem to be a pretty benign thing, but we've grown up in this era where it is actually scheduled. It's a Schedule 1 narcotic, right? So it's classified in the same category as heroin and other very addictive, very destructive substances.
Yeah.
And it's been a weird experience. Like, I've used cannabis throughout my life as well. I was telling you earlier, like, more recent years, I haven't. I've kind of grown out of it a little bit. I don't know what that means exactly. Like, I just got more focused on work and decided this thing was not as useful to me as it used to be. But I don't think anything bad about it. Like, there are trade-offs which we can explore. But this idea that we do need something, like, life is really hard, right? That you need some kind of vice or some kind of way to deal with life as it's coming at you. And it doesn't have to be, it sounds like horrible, like we're on a pod. Hey, everyone, like, weed is the thing. It's like, no, it doesn't have to be the thing. It could be whatever your path is, but it's medicinal. I don't know. The word medicine, right? There's this idea that the medicine is in the dose. So even something like as essential to life as water, if you drink too much water too fast, you die, right? So water is medicine of the most essential kind, right? You are 70% water. You're literally made of it. You have to have it. If you go without water for 3 days, you're dead, right? You cry tears of blood and you die, right? So it's medicinal, but if you overdose on water, well, then you also die. So you have to find this sweet spot in the middle.
Yeah.
All right. Consuming the right amount of water, consuming the right amount of food. And then also, it seems like these plants, medicines, whatever it may be, you need to have a proper relationship with them as well.
Yeah. I kind of like to think, though, that it's more so that you need to have a proper relationship with yourself, because what comes to mind actually is there's no historical records of anybody ever overdosing on cannabis.
Right.
But there are people who have drank too much water and literally died because of that, which is quite interesting. And then the allure towards cannabis, or the desire to ingest cannabis amongst anybody to alter your state of being and how you feel, I think, is one part of it. But maybe that has something to do with some sort of like intuitive, or some sort of like knowing that the plant also has all of these cannabinoids in them that are extremely medicinal and can kill tumors and cancer growth within your body. And what's so fascinating about that too is like, when you have chemotherapy, it literally attacks everything. It wreaks havoc on all your cells, all your microbiome. But cannabis performs a process called apoptosis, where it can send in part of the constituents or some of the cannabinoids within the cannabis into the cancer cell, kill the cancer cell, and cause no damage to any of the cells around it.
Right.
So there is something very, very deeply healing with cannabis. And I mean, I know people personally that have used cannabis oil, smoked cannabis, and like healed stage 4 cancer.
Yes. Yeah. The CBD is also a big one here. So why is it that, is this just a fiat thing that these plants have become so demonized and, regarded as drugs and destructive, addictive substances, when in reality they can actually provide these medicinal benefits?
I think totally. Yeah. I think that the pharmaceutical industry has really monopolized medicine to protect their margins. Well, the first time I heard Jeff Booth, actually on your show on the Booth series, talk about, things falling to the marginal cost of production, that really blew my mind. And it made me understand a little bit more that there's a incentive within the fiat paradigm to build some sort of a regulatory moat around your sector in the marketplace and prevent competitors.
Yeah.
And there's a decentralized element to these plants. Like, how do you stop people from growing cannabis? It's a little teeny seed.
Right.
It's just like destroying Bitcoin. You'd have to destroy every node on the planet at the exact same time. Like you couldn't go around and rally up every single cannabis seed on the planet at the exact same time.
Yeah. And every time you destroy one seed or one node, you send a signal to other seed producers or node operators to spin up new nodes, new seeds, et cetera. So there's always this competitive response to the attack.
Yep.
And that's what makes it anti-fragile, right? That if you attack it and it becomes stronger, basically. Yep. I wanted to ask you about that too, like the grassroots cannabis movement, right? This was not a top down, it's still a Schedule I drug. So this has been a bottom up movement in the United States. That metaphor, grassroots, like this is literally grassroots, right? From the bottom up.
Yeah.
What can we learn from the success so far of the cannabis movement in the United States? What can we infer, let's say, about the bottom-up movement of Bitcoin adoption? Do you think these things will have parallels?
I do think so. I think that it's when there is enough demand for something that people really want, it's in some ways really unstoppable. And the profit motives also exacerbate that. So ironically, when the government implemented prohibition, the supply of cannabis was obviously heavily stifled, but the demand was still there. So then the free market bids the price up. And as the price goes up, the margin increases, and then the economic incentive for people to move into that sector of the marketplace, produce whatever good or service it is, satiate that demand with supply. That incentive is really there. And it's obviously there with Bitcoin. Like, I kind of feel like in some ways, we've been moving through life for whatever it is, hundreds of thousands of years, trying to figure out what vessel we can find to put our economic energy, our life force, our surplus life force in. And I almost get like somewhat of like a psychedelic visualization where we're just one step up from like Neanderthals, and we're like going through the proverbial, life or the forest of life, like picking these things up, trying to like hold our energy, and it's just bleeding out.
Right.
And all of a sudden we have this thermodynamically sound vessel. It's like this aha moment, like, oh my gosh, I can maintain my excess life force. Like, that is such a powerful thing.
Yeah. It's like the 2001 Space Odyssey visual, right? Where the apes encounter the monolithic structure or whatever, and we're 15 years into this thing. And I really do believe it is the discovery of money.
It's the first money we've ever had. We had seashells, yellow shiny rocks, political currency units. Like, it's the first engineered money we've ever had. It's the first thing that actually was created as a money. We've been using other things as money.
Yeah. I'm struggling to think of another historical example like that, where we had like a whole series of approximations of the thing until we finally got the thing. The one example I've written about was the number 0, but that wasn't exactly. You had like numeral systems that were approximately working, like Roman numerals and things like that. But it wasn't until we got Hindu Arabic numerals that it really, really worked. Yeah. And then civilization exploded because we had a mathematical system based on truth.
Or maybe the wheel. Like, I visualize people walking around with baskets, things on their head, trying to carry a bunch of supplies. And then all of a sudden you create a wheel with a wheelbarrow or a carriage or whatever. It's like this monumental leap forward.
Yes. Yeah. Elegant in its simplicity, but very elemental, right? And it also speaks, that's a great analogy actually, because, how could the wheel be disrupted? How could the number 0 be disrupted? Like, it's always, they look the same too, right? They're both perfectly round circles, It's more, that's why I think it's more of a discovery almost than an invention in a way that we've adhered. I always go back to this Francis Bacon quote, nature to be commanded must be obeyed. So it's like when you discover these principles of nature that you actually adhere to or conform yourself to, that's when you unlock new levels of innovation, all the things that the zero-based numeral system, for instance, unlocked calculus for us. Calculus unlocked the Enlightenment, basically. So that whole pathway was unlocked through zero. And the wheel, I mean, I don't even know how many things that's unlocked. That's everything, right?
Yeah.
What technology is the wheel not a part of?
It's not a monopolizable technology either, because it's just an idea.
Right.
Just like Bitcoin, it's code. It's you can't stop people from running the software.
Yeah. Just a very basic idea that is highly useful.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's why it's so hard to describe as well, right? I can imagine in the early days of the wheel, maybe there was a wheel maximalist, right? It's like,
That's funny.
Guys, you don't get it. This thing is the shit. It's going to change everything. And everyone's just sitting around like, what are you talking about? It's just a round rock you got there. Yeah, I don't know. Either that or we're just crazy and we joined a cult. And
I don't know, but it's an exciting, magical, inspiring cult to be a part of, I will say.
The farm at Okefenokee is a revolutionary new regenerative agricultural community. It features an 8,000 tree olive orchard, which they use to make their own olive oil, as well as a very large pecan orchard. All the animals on the farm are heritage animals, with some varieties over 100 years old and others thousands of years old. Fresh eggs are produced daily by the farm's chickens. Also, there are over 1,000 beehives that pollinate the over 200 heirloom fruits and vegetables and provide honey to all the residents. The farm makes its own molasses, unrefined sugar, herbs, and spices. The farm also features an herbal apothecary and a commercial kitchen. These are just a few reasons why the farm is the healthiest place on earth. To learn more about the healthiest place on earth, go to okefarm.com and use discount code BREEDLOVE for $21,000 off custom cabin pricing. Again, to learn more about the farm at Okefenokee, go to okefarm.com and be sure to tell them I sent you. iCoin Technology has released a slick new hardware wallet. It looks like a mini iPhone with a high-res 3-inch touchscreen and camera on it. The device has no Wi-Fi, no cellular connection, and no GPS. It is an air-gapped hardware wallet which uses QR codes and a camera to communicate with the Bitcoin network. It has a built-in camera which is required for air-gap operation, and it has an optional Bluetooth compatibility. It's really a brand new user interface and user experience for a Bitcoin hardware wallet. iCoin makes self-custody accessible, easy to use, and non-intimidating. It even comes with an optional custom iCoin thermal printer, so you can print out the private key and its associated QR code when you're setting up the wallet. This makes setup quick and simple. Also, it is easy to restore the wallet just by reading the seed phrase QR code with the wallet camera. And as we always talk about on this show, the only way you can truly own your Bitcoin is by having it in self-custody. So you need a device like the iCoin wallet to truly own your Bitcoin. So go to iCointechnology.com/breedlove today for 30% off the purchase of this sleek new hardware wallet. Again, that's iCointechnology.com/breedlove. So let's back up a little bit for people that may be wondering why we're talking about cannabis and wheels and the number zero and Bitcoin and how we thread all these things together. Like, your background is in cannabis cultivation.
Yep.
How does that lead you into this path of, there's the stereotype of the stoner sitting around, smoking a doobie and having a deep conversation. So are you one of these stereotypical stoner guys that then became very fascinated with Bitcoin and now you've come into the Bitcoin rabbit hole? Like, what's your journey from cannabis cultivation into this world?
Well, I got into cannabis cultivation at 24 years old. I was invited by a friend of mine in Southern California where I grew up, who went to Humboldt State University, met some farmers and knew my affinity for cannabis and reached out to me and said, hey, there's an opportunity if you want to come up here and work a harvest and trim cannabis. I took that opportunity immediately. I was quite excited about it. And when I got there, I knew exactly what I was going to do. This is where I'm going to be. This is what I'm going to do. Yeah, so I worked for an individual under the medical marijuana laws. The Proposition 215 was the legal framework that allowed you to produce and sell, share. It was nonprofit laws, so you could share it with qualified patient members. Yeah, I worked for a guy out in the middle of nowhere for 2 years, growing indoor and outdoor cannabis for this individual. Saved up money, started growing in a garage that I built out myself. I rented a house and I put this elaborate grow room together. That then led me to putting up a large commercial scale grow in Southern Humboldt out in the hills. And as soon as I set that project up, the Medical Marijuana Safety Regulations Act, MRSA is what it's referred to, was signed into effect by Governor Jerry Brown, the governor of California at the time. And that was to put into effect the legal framework for recreational adult use cannabis. So it felt like for me, I was in the right place at the right time because I had this commercial scale cannabis cultivation site. I had a 501c3 nonprofit. I had everything in place. I was producing cannabis, and the regulations were written in a way where they were incentivizing, they were trying to coax the existing cannabis business operators into the legal framework, which was going to allow for the counties to permit the cultivation sites, which was going to be location dependent. You had to get biological studies. You had to be so far from a school, whatever. And then once you're permitted by the county, then you get ultimately a license from the state of California. So I started to go through the regulatory process, and I'm negotiating with this property owner that I had a lease on his land with. And I realized pretty quickly in the process of him stonewalling me that my future cannabis business dreams were in jeopardy. So I kind of put together and through like a Hail Mary, really. I scrapped together every dollar I could, went on a hunt to purchase property. And at the time, it was like this huge land rush. And the properties that adhered to all of the setbacks that basically you could get permitted based upon the land use ordinance were hard to buy. They were expensive. And so I found one that was ironically like very close to where I lived. And I put in an offer, and the offer got accepted, which was kind of a miracle. I closed escrow on the property, and I had like 6 weeks to get an application in to the county to get permitted. I succeeded at doing that. And then within 6 months, I got approved for my permit, which was also a miracle. I was one of the first people in the county to get approved. Part of that was because there was a lot of controversy over my particular project because I was close to a city limit and I had a neighbor that was quite upset. And so there's threats of lawsuit. And essentially it forced the hand of the director of the planning department to make a decision on my project. So what was a pretty brutal process and was frustrating, as I was going through it, was actually the thing that got me approved so quick. But to step back, as soon as I closed escrow on that property, I bought 10 acres with a house and 7 acres adjacent land. And it was the first real estate that I had owned. So that was like, now I'm in this position, I have this large economic incentive for me to understand the boom bust cycles and what position I was really in. Right. So I started to, go down the YouTube rabbit hole and study economics on a basic level. And that led me to Austrian economic theory, hard money, the fractional reserve lending, which I understood basically from watching some documentaries in the past. So you were into
that before Bitcoin then?
Yeah, and so it was 9 months basically while I was going through the permit process and just learning about, the boom bust cycles. And that led me to Bitcoin. And when I discovered Bitcoin in December of 2017, it blew my mind. And I had literally been watching the value of the commodity that I'm producing descend because the supply is satiating demand. And then I'm thinking about, wait a second. So we have this monetary instrument that's truly finite. And I believe I heard you say this. Money is effectively a call option on any good or service the marketplace can produce. So it has infinite demand. So if you compare infinite demand with true scarcity, you have the apex monetary instrument. And looking at the position that I was in through the lens of Bitcoin, I realized as soon as I got my state license, there I am. This is this vindicating moment for me in my life. Like, fuck you to everybody who gave me shit about my love for cannabis. Like, here I am licensed by the state of California to produce this product. By the state, and this dream come true moment for me is a nightmare. This is an existential crisis,
Right.
because the theme that I was experiencing was most certainly going to continue. The value of the product was going to continue to decrease,
Right.
while my operating costs and living costs are going to continue to increase.
Yeah.
And so I decided to sell the property, which was also another series of miracles. And so 9 months later, I was able to close escrow and get out of the project. And then I did farm management and consulting services for like the last 7 years or so. So I have all the upside of being in the cannabis business, but none of the downside. Being a cannabis business owner is tough. You have all sorts of regulatory issues. You got banking impedance.
Yeah.
You know, when I sold my property, like the guy who, I was very lucky to find the guy who bought it, because you couldn't get a traditional 30-year fixed on the property. And then I experienced firsthand like the friction and the energy loss associated with like owning real estate.
Yeah.
It took me 9 months to sell the place.
Right.
6% commission went to these two real estate agents who, you know, bless their hearts and thank you for what they did. But like, they didn't do a lot of work for the money that they earned, you know?
Sure. The what you were talking about business license there, something came up for me. I read, this was a Instagram post recently, I think. A business license is when the state revokes your right to do something and then sells it back to you.
That's so well said.
What was your experience going? I mean, you obviously got it up close and personal in dealing with the state and business licensing. Like, how was that experience for you?
You know, going through the process, you could say that in some sense I was like grading on a curve, because it was illegal. And there was, you know, and I have so many friends and people that I ran into, you know, have met and worked with over the years that have had real legal trouble, even though they were lawful under California medical laws. There's almost like this guilty till proven innocent situation that seems to unfold if you get caught cultivating cannabis or with cannabis. So I was just excited that the law was changing, but it definitely was like very frustrating, very deeply frustrating going through the whole process, where it's like, look, this is just a plant, you know, and like all these other crops that we produce, like there's a fraction of the regulatory hurdles to jump through.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm so passionate about cannabis because I grew up in a household where there was pharmaceutical use. My mother was, you know, deeply depressed, married to a psychiatrist, and she, as a result, you know, got on pharmaceuticals for depression and anxiety and whatever. And watching the havoc that wreaked on her and other family members, I had a deep passion about, you know, putting forth my energy and time into helping to provide a better or another option at the very least to people who wanted it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It really does frame up the psychosis we're living in, right? When it's illegal to grow a plant. Like I have a hard time. If the plant doesn't hurt, you're not using the plant to harm anyone, right? It's not poisonous. You're not growing a plant to cultivate a poison to go and wage war with someone or whatever. Why is the rule of law being, you know, legal force being used to suppress the cultivation of a plant? It's very difficult to like when you really step back from fiat world and just look at it for what it is, it's hard for me to understand what that is.
Yeah, I think cannabis, amongst, you know, some of the other illegal drugs, are kind of a threat to the existing system. Cannabis seems to amplify the empathy within an individual. And it's, you know, I remember the first time I smoked cannabis, the first thing that I thought was like, wait a second, I was like nervous. I remember it very vividly. I was like 16 years old. And I was like, oh, this is this terrible thing. Like, what's going to happen to me? Like, my friends are doing it. They look like they're having fun. And then there I am thinking like, this is quite benign. Like, I feel good. Why is this illegal? Why is it that you can get all fucked up on alcohol? You could buy cigarettes. You could take all these pharmaceuticals, but you can't smoke this plant.
Yeah.
And now, after traveling down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, I believe it's because it's just such a catalyst for helping the people to understand or to think outside the box and to question the existing system. And yeah, it's I think in that sense it's kind of obvious.
Is it because psychedelics do that, right? They Michael Pollan in his book says it disrupts the default mode network, right? The sort of unconscious habits that you just carry out without thinking about them day to day, that psychedelics at least allow you to reprogram that default mode network. You sort of take a step outside of yourself. It's kind of metacognitive in a way. Is cannabis on that spectrum of psychedelic, or where?
I think so. I think it's much less so than like psilocybin mushrooms.
Yeah.
And I heard someone, I forget who it was, but describe like, so neurons, like Dispenza says this, neurons that fire together, wire together.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some sense, it's kind of like a ski slope. Mm-hmm. You get these ruts that you end up falling into. Yeah. And when you're in that psychedelic state, even though it's like on a very low level with cannabis, it's almost like putting a blank slate of fresh powder there, so you can take a different path. You can wire new neural pathways. It kind of disrupts that neurological framework so that you can think differently in a very similar way that Bitcoin does. It disrupts this like neurological pathway that we developed to try to understand the world and the forces that we're fighting against. And it like resets that, and then now you can develop a new neurological pathway and a new belief set and new understanding that all Bitcoiners understand. Like it makes so much more sense. It is so much more obvious. It's almost painful once you realize it. You're like, why doesn't everybody understand this? Like it's so obvious.
So there's this it's kind of like the ossification of neural pathways, you might say, in the mind, right? That's the default mode network. It's like just the routine, the subroutines you run unconsciously. Yep. And I've played with this idea before, but I've thought that maybe the state or government could be considered the externalization of that, or the macrocosm of that, that you have these ossified action pathways, right? Which we call institutions. Mm-hmm. And so we get into these ruts, we do these things, we file our taxes, we do, get our driver's license, we get the business license. We just think that's the way the world is, right? We take it for granted. But something about the psychedelic experience allows you to see that ossification of pathways for what it is, like to take that step out and then rechart your own pathways. Mm-hmm. And somehow, and this is where the Bitcoin is psychedelic in a way, like It actually causes us to do that with these externalized action pathways that, we have all these ossified institutional structures and habits and routines and bureaucracies that we just, it's just, what did Thomas Sowell say about bureaucracy? That the outcome is meaningless and it's all about the procedure, something like that. Mm-hmm. It's just, did you check the box or not? Did you, it doesn't matter that it's wasteful. It doesn't matter that it's destructive. It doesn't matter that it's deceptive or stealing or whatever. It's just like, did you check the box or not?
Yeah.
And we start to drown in all of this non-productive bullshit work. And what is it about? Like, it's such a weird thing to talk about. Like the common thread between a psychedelic experience and a monetary technology, but it's kind of this as above, so below thing. One of these things allows you to scrub the ossified neural pathways. This allows you to scrub the ossified action pathways. I mean, am I just way out on a limb here? Like, what is the connection between these two things?
I don't know, but what comes to mind is it's like there's almost some parallels there in meditation, mm-hmm. where you're stepping outside of that like routine, that mm-hmm. monkey mind, that belief set, those neurological pathways, and almost observing, like removing yourself from yourself. Mm-hmm. And you can see outside, and you could more effectively see everything.
Step back.
Yeah. And Bitcoin does that, and psilocybin and cannabis. It kind of helps you like see the bigger picture in some sense.
So people that have done psychedelics, it's hard to describe psychedelics to someone that's never done them. But I don't know. It's very hard to describe in words.
Totally.
But most people I think that have done them can fully relate to that experience. Mm-hmm. But why is Bitcoin doing that? Why is Bitcoin giving us that metacognitive pressure to step back?
I'm I don't know. And I've in some sense been on like, you know, the journey of trying to understand that, but there's something very transformative about both Bitcoin and psychedelics. Yeah, I don't know. It's like, it just allows you to think differently, think outside of the box, you know? And what with Bitcoin though, it's not like coming up with some new abstract belief set or whatever. I think that's one of the things that's so special about Bitcoin and why it becomes like almost religious and ideological, because you're believing in something that makes so much sense. That's just predicated on truth and physics and math and consent and peace and love. Yeah. It's like very, very magical, like heals you. Like it sends you on this journey of like self-exploration. If you're in it long enough, or if you had, you know, the luxury or the abundance to be able to develop a significant position in Bitcoin, that it seems to happen faster because you're kind of liberated from this rat race. You're liberated from the challenge of becoming, like I heard Saifedean say this, when you're economically productive and you're producing a surplus in the fiat paradigm, you also you either need to sub out and hire like a money manager, or you need to become an interest rate arbitrage specialist, right? You got to figure out how to hold your surplus in an asset that's appreciating faster than the debasement of the currency. And that's extremely dilutive of your energy. Yeah. And so if you're moving out of a position of survival, or even if you're thriving, but you're spending your time trying to maintain your position in the world while the currency is being debased, you quite literally have this force pulling down on you. Once you get rid of that anchor or that ball and chain, it's like this ascension in some sense takes place. And then you're like, you realize like, wait a second, there's more to life than this. And what's my purpose? And what do I want out of life? And what am I doing here? And it just sends you on like a deeply, at least for me and other Bitcoiners I've talked to, like a deeply spiritual journey of like self introspection. And like it's healing, you know, like I know so many Bitcoiners that are like going through the process of trying to figure out how to thrive. Like it's what I'm experiencing. Like I like I was talking about this when I got here earlier, like I had spent the last 6 months kind of, it's almost like I'm relearning how to live, where like I was in this fear. If you distill it down to the most basics, it's a fear state, but this cortisol induced state of operating that I got really good at leveraging to get things done. Now that I'm in a better position in my life, and as a result of Bitcoin, I'm having to learn how to live in a state of thriving, which is very foreign. And then I wake up sometimes and I'm like, I kind of don't know how to be. This is like really weird.
Yeah, you can get addicted to those stress hormones in a way. And they are useful if you channel them to getting something done, right? That a lot of people, you know, motivate, energize themselves from anger or whatnot. But yeah, it's so, I wonder too with Bitcoiners, because is it that simple? Humans are obviously one of the most complex things in the known universe, right? To ourselves, at least, that, you know, human psychology, you can't know what any human will do in any given moment, right? We're infinitely complex, much less when you wire all of us together in a global economy. It's like, you know, many orders of magnitude more complex. Yet somehow it seems like we're flirting with the idea that just changing the incentive structure in which we operate vastly overhauls the general patterns of human action in the world. Is it that simple? Like because going back to the wheel and zero, it's like, okay, that sounds really alluring in a way, but it can also flirt with that edge of just crazy town, where people are like, what are you talking about? You know, it's just, you just fixed the money and then you fixed all these other problems. Like it's almost an equal footing to either be like, yes, this is extremely profound, or this is just kind of a silly cultish thing.
Yeah, I think one of the many things that's so beautiful about Bitcoin is it aligns the interests of the individual with the interests of the collective. Yeah. And another Booth insight that I find to be so profound is he says, where you have abundance in money, you create scarcity in everything else. Yes. Where you have scarcity in money, you create abundance in everything else. And so I don't think you will ever be able to stop people from trying to hoard as much resources as they possibly can. You know, like Jack Mahler says this, I absolutely love this. Like, money is your time and energy in an abstracted form. You'll always want more of that. And you can never stop people from wanting more of that.
Sure.
And if the money is shitty, then you're using other things as money that have demand on them. In this case, housing. Like, we have a homeless crisis because people are hoarding houses. But I would much rather have a bunch of Bitcoin than a bunch of houses.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just this discovery of scarcity, this inviolable, immutable monetary instrument, or this protocol, is just sucking people into it because it serves their self-interest. You know, and the idea of collectivism, I find to be entirely a flawed premise, because the idea of the individual sacrificing to some extent or suffering at all to create a collective that is thriving is entirely flawed, because you can't have a thriving collective comprised of suffering individuals.
Yes, 100%.
And so there's just, I mean, I say this and it's seemingly very hyperbolic, and maybe it's not true, but it seems to be for me. Like, the discovery or the creation of Bitcoin is the biggest deal in human history. Yeah. It's like the perfect thing that we needed at the perfect time. Yeah. It's, you know, like we were talking before we started about gratitude. Like, there are times I literally shed fucking tears because I'm just like, I'm so fucking happy we have this. Yeah. Like, it makes sense. You know, I felt like I went through life for so many years just thinking like, gosh, the world is so fucked. Like, there has to be something here. Yeah. Where's the meaning in this? What am I missing? And then when I discovered Bitcoin, it was like, wow, this changes things. The level of gratitude that I have. And then to be able to experience, I call it the BB world, all of known history, since the beginning of time before Bitcoin. The reality that we live in is fundamentally different than the AB world after Bitcoin. You know, pre-Bitcoin, we were limited to the physicality of property or centrally controlled derivatives of that property. And that creates some sort of, I don't know, game theoretic fuckedness. Yeah. Where if you can effectively issue more certificates than you have gold on reserve, then you're at a market advantage over the honest market participants. Then the incentive is to figure out how to collude with some king, politicians, government, or whatever, and protect yourself from, you know, bank run. And now you have an advantage in the marketplace. Yeah. And I think that's why people have congregated around religion. There's like we're really attracted to wanting to align with some sort of ideology that makes us feel better about our existence and this seemingly deeply unfairness in the world. And so, you know, I remember growing up, you know, we all know this, like our parents was like, life isn't fair. And I had this feeling always like there's got to be a way for the world to work better. And in some sense, Bitcoin, like, it injects this level of fairness into our reality that absolutely changes things. And then our ability to now expose dishonest market participants is quite high. It's really easy to do so. You know, I think with the ETFs, if one of the ETF providers offers proof of reserves, they're at an advantage over the ones who don't. If one of these ETF providers sells more claims to Bitcoin than they have on reserve, eventually they'll get exposed and, you know, they'll go out of business. Yeah. And so Bitcoin seems to be the catalyst that rewards the honest market participants and punishes the dishonest market participants. And that understanding was so deeply transformative for me. It's like this just state of bliss where I'm like, oh my gosh, like, we can trade fairly now. Like, we are all playing the same economic game. Yeah. That is such a big deal. It's so inspiring. And to think about all of the economic energy and I call it like the great demonetization that's taking place. Like, I personally don't own any real estate. I know lots of people that have sold a lot of real estate to buy Bitcoin. So that is effectively downward price pressure on housing. And that helps people who want houses. Sure. It's a big deal.
Dude, it's beautifully said. And this idea of Bitcoin is like an inducement to virtuosity, you know, like that's radical. You know, philosophers have been trying to figure out how to cultivate virtue and, you know, upgrade our moral and cognitive software for as long as they've been philosophizing. But, and we've made a lot of strides in the right direction. You know, we're a lot better off now than we were 5,000 years ago in terms of economic prosperity and peace and general welfare and living standards and all these things. But we were always kind of in this trap that I think you're describing. We talked about this a little bit out before we recorded. We need humans to compete, right? That is competition. Economic, peaceful competition is a godsend, right? It's a blessing, right? It's what allows us to continually progress in terms of producing more and better solutions at lower cost, basically.
Catalyzes innovation.
Yes. So competition is a beautiful thing.
Totally.
But it needs to be, for it to be effective economically, it needs to be restrained physically, right? It doesn't need to bleed over into the domain of coercive competition like warfare, violence, criminality. And so we've been in this weird conundrum where like we want as much competition as possible, right? You were saying this earlier, where you have this huge incentive to go out and sell these things, but then once you establish a toehold in the marketplace, you want to put up a regulatory moat, right? You want to monopolize that
Prevent
space,
the competition, stifle the supply,
right. Use coercion,
yep,
to prevent peaceful competition. That's like the temptation, that humans have been unable to resist. And so there's like, the visualization I have is like this dial, right? Like we want to dial up the competition right up to the point of not violating any individual's private person or property, right? We want to maximize competition, but we don't want to cross that line, because once you cross that line, you start to dissolve the social fabric. Yeah. It's like, well, if you stole my shit, then I'm going to steal your shit. If I stole his shit, he's going to steal his shit. And like, before you know it, the whole thing collapses, right? The whole game
induces like sociopathology.
Yes. 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 And so, and I wanted to go back to what you said too there, why does Bitcoin matter in the scope of that analysis? It's the physicality of property. It is the physicality of property. That is the invitation or the inducement to violence. Because if I can just come and steal your shit, I don't need to negotiate with you. I don't need to care about your opinion or your preferences. I can just $5 rent you and take your stuff. And so we needed the government, we needed the rule of law, we needed force to fight force, right? We had to fight fire with fire. But Bitcoin, man, out of the blue, we get this non-physical property. Property as in the sense of an asset you can own, right? But you can own it via possession, but the possession is just informational, right? You're just keeping a secret, basically. And it's the most important asset in the world, which is money, right? Which, as you cited me earlier, it's a call option on all other goods and services. So really, if you can just safe keep this one secret, you now have invested so much autonomy and power in the individual. It's like the ultimate expression of that ancient ideal, giving power to the people. Bitcoin has done that by letting individuals keep their purchasing power secure from political power. And in doing that, it's dissolving political structures, right? It's defunding political structures. Now all this gets radical. People are like, what are you talking about? I don't see that in the world. It's like, well, we're early days, right? It's a $2 trillion asset. It's the fastest growing asset in human history. I don't know how much faster you want it to grow, but that's what it is. But you can think of it like this. If Bitcoin's a $2 trillion market cap, that's $2 trillion of purchasing power that the state cannot access by money printing. All right. So maybe it's just a chink in the armor today because global money is whatever, 140 trillion or whatever the number is, but it's growing fast. And if it keeps growing fast, then what are the results, right? All the institutional realities above us or that are built on top of that, again, in layers, in stacks, they start to dissolve, right? Because the base layer has changed. The physicality of property no longer needs to be secured by a monopoly on violence because you have recourse to a non-physical property that people can exchange via consent without recourse to any authority.
Or a third party.
Yep. And that, it completely changes the game, right? All of the economic games we've been playing up until this point now are called into question or need to be reevaluated at the least in light of the discovery of this pure money. Yep. And I don't know. That may sound like outlandish or a lot to say, but like, I think that's the idea Bitcoiners are wrestling with. It's like, what now?
Totally.
Where do we go with all this?
Well, one of the things that you say that I really like is it'll make governments become much more beholden to the preferences of their citizens.
Yes.
And it'll also incentivize much more fiscal prudence and responsibility.
Yeah.
Because if you just paper over an economic decision. And the thing that's so fucked with fiat is that it's almost like you're driving some sort of economic endeavor of some sort that the government is funding through printed money off of a cliff. But the individual who dies is somebody who's in the working class that doesn't own property.
Yes.
They're the ones that are suffering.
Yeah.
And so it's
no skin in the
fucked.
game.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah. The people making the decisions are not bearing the consequences for it. Yeah.
Well, and I think that because there's that small percentage, whatever it is, 0.01% of the population that's sociopathic, and kind of referring back to that game theoretic fuckness that exists in the BB paradigm, the before Bitcoin era. There's something that breaks in people. And I don't think any of us are exempt from this. Like if I was living a different life and I was so economically impoverished and things were so hard, at what point would I resort to violating someone else's property to exist? Yeah, it's quite profound. I also think that there's something very metaphysical because you have this invisible monetary instrument that is being traded on the internet, which is like synthetic ether. But this invisible instrument, it's like, Saylor famously said, it's the discovery of matter in cyberspace. Well, I like to think about it as metaphysical property. It's like Satoshi merged the physical world with the metaphysical world. And now I can take my surplus and I could put it out into the metaphysical realm, the land beyond the ether, the invisible, whatever you want to call that. And it's outside of the reach of anybody unless I willingly give it up.
Right. Yeah. Naval said something like, speech and money are now the same thing with the advent of Bitcoin. Like information and energy have been merged together in a very profound way.
Yeah.
Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. Have you ever wanted to start a business in the Bitcoin space? If so, then the Wolf Startup Accelerator could be for you. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to businesses developing in the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times each year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. Go to wolfnyc.com to learn more or apply today. Again, that's Wolf, WOLFNYC.com. Something you said earlier too, where, in the BB world, pre-Bitcoin, if you had been successful in the fiat paradigm and you had accrued some amount of savings or economic surplus, you now had to go on the defensive, right? You had to figure out, okay, I'm either going to hire a wealth advisor to diversify me and all this stuff, or I'm going to figure out how to play the arbitrage games. I need to figure out a scheme basically to outpace inflation from destroying the economic surplus that I've accumulated up until this point. It was just occurring to me that so the person that got there presumably did something productive, hopefully. Hopefully it's an entrepreneur. Sure, people have done things non-productive to get rich, statesmen and all that. But presumably it was something productive. So in the fiat paradigm, you have this person that was very competent and productive, accrued a surplus, which means he solved a lot of problems for a lot of people in a very economically efficient way. That person that's played a positive sum game really good, right? A win-win game, right? Where his wins were everyone else's wins.
Yep.
Is now being induced or maybe forced or incentivized at least to start playing some zero-sum game where he needs to go and place certain bets on Wall Street and make sure that he's defending his nest egg from inflation. And so he's no longer being the productive guy. We're taking him offline. So like it's a weird thing where the entrepreneur succeeds and then he stops becoming an entrepreneur and becomes a politician. Yeah. And I think you've seen this a lot too, right? Like Peter Thiel's a pretty damn political guy. Elon Musk has become a very political guy. Like we don't want our entrepreneurs to become fucking politicians. Yeah. We want them to keep entrepreneuring and solving problems like better, faster, cheaper satisfaction of human wants. Yeah. That's what we want. We don't want these guys to get rich and then have to go play these political stupid games that hurt everyone to defend the economic surplus they created producing for other people. Yep. And I mean, my question would be like, well, do you think Bitcoin will actually do that? Will it actually let our entrepreneurs be entrepreneurs and not force them to become politicians? Yeah, I do think so. I think that the reason that if somebody wrote, if an individual has some sort of business endeavor and they receive, a payout or they earn hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, they're putting that economic surplus because nobody's just holding the dollars in the bank. People are, when they talk about, oh, so-and-so has so much money. I find myself nowadays being like, hold on, do they have a lot of money? No, they don't have a lot of money. They have a lot of stuff. Yeah. And so you're incentivized to become political so that you prevent that political apparatus from, and people who are below you economically from voting your stuff away from you. Exactly. Then you have the other problem, which is the cancel-on effect. If your basket of things that you own is increasing at 7-10% a year, whatever it is, and you could leverage those things, then now all of a sudden you're just borrowing against the fiat dollar denominated accruement of value against that asset to go and buy more assets. It's the classic real estate example. You own 10 houses. Those houses are worth $5 million. Each one's $500,000. A year later, now your $5 million real estate portfolio is 5.5. And you can go and borrow that $500,000 to go and buy another house. Now you're competing with leverage in currency that you didn't earn, that was minted into existence through fractional reserve lending against somebody who's been saving money to try to buy a house to raise their family. Right. So it's creating that have not, have yachts world where the property owning class is winning at the expense of the non-property owning class. Yeah. And so it's zero sum. Yeah. And that is obviously a terrible problem. Yeah. You're penalizing prudence. And then it also creates the political movement of we need to tax the rich. There's this guy, I think it's Gary Economics, who's gone viral recently talking about, hey, we have this problem in the world. We need to tax the rich. So we have an issue that's predicated or built a result directly upon the violation of property rights. Yeah. And so then the solution is to further violate property rights. Classic Marxism. It's nonsensical. Yeah. It's quite, it's pretty silly, really. 100%. Yeah. I always say that about Marxism, that he properly identified a problem, right? Wealth disparity, even a widening wealth disparity. But then he prescribed the exact opposite solution, to abolish private property rather than to perfect private property. Yeah. What is it about? So is it ingrained in human nature to want, what do they call this? The boiling crab effect, right? Where the crab's trying to escape the pot. Crab's in a bucket. Yeah. And the other crab just drags it. Like the crab that's dragging the escaping crab back into the pot has no evolutionary gain, right? It's just misery loves company. Just get back in here and die with me. Yep. Yet they do it. Is that something that's evolutionarily ingrained in us, or do you think that's something that incentives fix as well? That's a good question. I've never really put any thought into that, but I do think that the incentive structure and the forcing function in some sense that Bitcoin creates insulates yourself from that, because there's also, if
if you're wealthy in the traditional world, people know what you have. And unless you publicly announce how much Bitcoin you have, people don't know how much Bitcoin you have. I do have concerns. I don't think it's probable, but that's just my optimistic mindset, I would say, that, you know, that you could say the have-nots are going to lash out against the Bitcoiners. It's kind of like one of those things, you know, it's the common story where you continue to tell people about Bitcoin and they're like, oh, well, you know, they're not interested. And then it's like, well, you got so lucky. So that might be something that we deal with. I don't necessarily put much time and energy into any of the negative potential timelines. I think that we're powerful beings. And I think where attention goes, energy flows. And so I'm very conscious about visualizing, you know, you could say the highest timeline, the outcome that I would like, and I mean, a lot of people would like to see evolve. And it seems like in some sense, we're really moving through that. The time, you know, the things seem to be speeding up. Like I'm quite shocked in some sense that some of the developments within Bitcoin that have been happening have happened at this point. I think it was an inevitable, but I thought it would be a lot further down the road. Yeah,
I agree with that. I mean, I guess we've never really known how fast this would all unfold, but it still feels shocking to see how fast it's been.
When you're in it, it's like watching the fucking paint dry. But when you zoom out, it's like, whoa, this has not been very long.
Yeah. Going on 9 years for me. And I'll just remember early on the laughter, like people would just laugh in your face, laugh, like hysterically laughing in your face, pointing at you and laughing. From my experience, talking to these smart money guys about Bitcoin, and they literally thought you were a complete and total joke. And here we are 9 years later, and it's like, strategic Bitcoin reserve, you know, presidents running on the platform, countries, you know, what, how? And then those same people that are like laughing at are now, hey, how are you doing? You know, and its memories are so interestingly short in that respect.
Yeah.
And for me, it's kind of like a drama in learning about human psychology. It's like watching someone that was literally, you know, had nothing to do with this thing at all. And then all of a sudden, because of the price movement, their entire orientation towards the asset, towards you, towards the whole space changes based on price.
Yep.
And so there's an interesting thing about price as this like primary communication tool that shapes people's worldviews that I found very fascinating.
Totally agree. And I think that the people who seem to struggle with grokking Bitcoin the most are the ones who have been quite successful in the traditional economic paradigm. There's like a deep level of cognitive dissonance. Yeah. And I could say in my personal journey, I didn't really struggle with that so much because I had never, well, one, being a cannabis producer and having the banking impedance that I had, although I was lawful within the state and the jurisdiction that I was operating in and I'm paying taxes, I still had challenges in getting my cash into the bank.
Right.
That, and I kept being like, I'm expanding my business. So all of my surplus kept going back into the business. So I can say for me personally, I was very fortunate to discover Bitcoin before I had an incentive to believe that the system that I was operating within was working well for me, because it kind of wasn't in some sense. And I was operating outside of the system and interfacing within that paradigm very minimally. So I was pretty well primed to understand Bitcoin when I did, when I discovered it. So I didn't personally suffer from that cognitive dissonance, but people do. It's, you know, like you say, often it's a bitter pill to swallow to think that all the things that you've learned, and some people have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to university, to get indoctrinated. You know, this narrative goes against a lot of what people believe.
Yeah. And so maybe let's talk about that. Like, how do we get, this has got, I mean, I would assume you would hypothesize this is also related to the money, that we get to this level of narrative corruption, I guess, where our institutional realities that we think or are conditioned to think are there to serve us, or, you know, they have They're centered on the purpose of human flourishing, something like that. Like they exist to serve us, but you get the orange pill moment, you unplug from the matrix, and all of a sudden you see like, oh wait, this is equipment that's being used to facilitate the tax farming of people. How did we get, where did all that conditioning and narrative manipulation, how's it been so successful up until this point? Like, how do we get people to think, for instance, that inflation is the normal and healthy state and affairs of a growing economy? Like, how do they inject that idea into people's minds so successfully that even people working on Wall Street believe it, right? The money masters of the world believe, oh yeah, of course you've got to print money. That's how things work.
Well, I think most people mean well and have good intentions. And although some don't, I think most people do. And I think that we didn't have a technological solution. I think, I've softened my distaste for the prior paradigm that we've come out of, because it's the best that we had. Going back to the gratitude, I mean, look at the world that we've built, and it's like, wait, we built this on the technology of a yellow shiny rock, and then a corrupted derivative or layer system on top of that. Like, the world is quite beautiful if you look at it from that perspective. And
despite that system, it's beautiful.
Despite that system. Yeah. And so I think people are always trying to come up with some sort of narrative or internal dialogue around why they're doing what they're doing. And maybe in some form it's like the debasement of the currency, because that was a co-optable and corruptible system, kind of going back to the game theory. If you're dishonest, then you have the advantage in the marketplace if you can get rid of that or get away with that dishonesty. I think that people, they self-dilute. Like, as the currency is diluted, the dilution of the individual seems to coincide that.
Excellent. And back to your point on the regulatory mode, right? That the successful, productive guy needs to start engaging in non-productive activities to preserve his livelihood into the future. Maybe the narrative moat is part of that too. You need to, if you're in the money printing business, for instance, well, it's probably going to be pretty useful if you can create some academic philosophy that justifies and substantiates your right to print money, and why it's necessary that you do so in times of economic crisis and pain, to quote unquote save the world or stabilize prices or lower unemployment or whatever the charge is. If you can create this, it's like an addict rationalizing their addiction, right? It's like, oh, I need to use the heroin because I don't know. I've never been a heroin addict or known one, so I don't know how they would rationalize it. But that's the nature of addiction, right? You tell yourself and other people some story about why. To get personal actually about it, my mother was an alcoholic. She used to always tell me she could quit whenever she wanted. She could quit whenever she wanted. That's what she said for 20 years, and she never did. Finally, she did. She did finally quit in the end, so she was right eventually. But for 20 years, she just said that all the time. Her story was she could quit whenever she wanted. Alcohol wasn't a problem because she could quit whenever she wanted. Yet she was drinking every day. And it was very bad for her life and our life and all those things. That's a rationalization, right? And so it seems like, again, that as above, so below thing, we are dealing with that now. We're like dealing with the consequences of our own rationalization up until this point. It just happens to be called Keynesian economics. Like, we created this whole fucking cover story. And then imposed it or indoctrinated people into it to perpetuate its acceptance and the consensus around it. To keep the scheme going. Like,
from a positive perspective though, it seems like it had to happen to get us here, as fucked as it is. I wonder sometimes, I think that Keynes knew what he was doing, but sometimes I wonder if he kind of was just so self-deluded, serving as self-interest, that there's that deep internal self-deception that's taking place there. But I think we needed it to get to where we are now. Like you had to have a derivative system where you're limited to the physicality of property. It's corruptible. The incentive is to figure out how to co-opt that and serve your self-interest. Most people don't do the dishonest thing. The people who do, they had the advantage. They took control. And now we have this monetary protocol that's rules without rulers. So you don't have to lean on and trust in some benevolent, seemingly benevolent politician or individual or group of individuals. And that's profound.
Yeah. There's this idea from Nietzsche. He says something like you had to go through the pains of slavery before you could be worthy of mastering yourself. Something like that. Like we needed to know what the wrong thing was for a long time. Before the soil was ready to plant the seed of Bitcoin, something like that. Like we needed to endure the pain of all this fiat bullshit up until a point. Because if you think about it, like say we take out the man in the middle problem with currency, and then we had like gold-backed currency really worked. There was some way to make that, you could solve the Oracle problem, right? So whatever the paper says is what is actually in the vault, right? And there's some way to cement that in a way that's incorruptible. Bitcoin probably would have never worked. It probably would have never monetized.
Well, you still have the incentive to violence because now you go invade the neighboring country, take their gold.
That's true.
So I think that in some sense, like Bitcoin,
I guess I would just say it was lessened. Maybe not gone, but it would be a lessened demand and urgency for Bitcoin.
I think we would have less issues in the world today. But I think the need for Bitcoin was still there because of the incentive to violence.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Would you rather have 1 Bitcoin today or 2 Bitcoin a few years from now? Bitcoin mining is a tried and true strategy for accumulating Bitcoin. Over a 2 to 4 year time frame, successful miners have consistently accumulated more Bitcoin than they otherwise would with a traditional dollar cost average strategy. Blockware mining as a service enables you to start mining Bitcoin from your laptop. Blockware handles everything from securing the miners to sourcing low-cost power to configuring the mining pool. They do it all. Plus, with Blockware's one-of-a-kind mining marketplace, you can buy and sell live Bitcoin miners with just a few keystrokes. In this marketplace, buyers get to purchase live machines at vetted facilities, enabling them to mine with zero lead time. And sellers get the opportunity to liquidate their machines and hosting contracts at will. This means you can mine Bitcoin with zero long-term commitment and high liquidity on your mining rigs. Blockware will even cover your energy bill for 1 week per mining rig when you sign up at mining.blockwaresolutions.com/breedlove. Again, that's 1 free week of Bitcoin mining at mining.blockwaresolutions.com/breedlove. And on top of this offer, you can also use code BREEDLOVE to get $100 off your first mining rig with Blockware Solutions. Bitcoin custody is evolving. Both self-custody and single third-party custody come with significant risk and trade-offs. Onramp is pioneering a new standard, multi-institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure, adding fault tolerance and redundancy to your setup. Onramp secures your Bitcoin in a segregated cold storage multi-key vault guarded by 3 independent institutional-grade custodians, none of which have unilateral control over your keys. Your funds are fully auditable on-chain, cannot be rehypothecated, and can only move or be withdrawn at your explicit direction. Multi-institution custody removes the technical, mental, and physical burdens of private key management, providing unparalleled peace of mind for you and your loved ones. Bitcoin is money, and as the price continues to appreciate, Onramp helps you seamlessly tap into financial services like trading, inheritance, insurance, loans, IRAs, and more, all without compromising on security or accessibility. Schedule a consultation with the Onramp team to learn more at onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove. Again, that's onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove. So as I said, like way earlier, I'd seen your work before we met. I just saw some of your rant videos, which I thought were entertaining and good. Edutainment, I think, is the term they use, where it's educational, but it's also funny and entertaining. So I appreciated that. But we first met down in Mexico at the second Art of Alpha retreat, and got to know each other a lot down there. And I appreciate you sharing. I already said this earlier, but I really appreciate you sharing what you did share about your personal journey growing up with your mom and your dad, and all of the stress that took place between them. And that was just good to hear for me, where I'm at, kind of going through my own situation with my daughter today. So that was very helpful. I immediately noticed, and I guess I'd already seen your content, so I knew you were a good speaker, but I noticed almost immediately that it is your gift, right? You have the gift of gab, or you're good with the spoken word. What is it? But you've also shared with me outside in the office that, like, you're not that you're introverted, but you're always hesitant to kind of step into the spotlight and speak publicly and do all this stuff. What has changed for you? What? Because I shared that perspective. Like, I'm actually more introverted, so I never had any aspiration to talk on camera or do any of these things. But Bitcoin became such a deafening call. It's like, just do whatever you can, anything you can. It doesn't matter about your feelings or what you like or don't like. Like, whatever you can do to serve this thing, do that, no matter what. So for me, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna do that.
Yeah.
What has it been like for you?
Well, I've become just absolutely enthralled and obsessed with Bitcoin, like many of us do. And, for me, I think supporting the Bitcoin movement, it feels like my purpose in some sense. And I didn't really know how to go about that. So I just started basically making these random rants, sharing some of my, more, philosophical thoughts, shedding light on the long-term societal implications of Bitcoin. And I think for me, now that I have a 3-year-old daughter, I'm learning more about children. So my parents, when they divorced at 5 years old, I think I internalized that what became a very brutal feud between the two of them, more of a vendetta from my mother against my father. As something that I was responsible for. Because when you're a child, you basically think the whole world is about you and it's your fault.
Sure.
And that kind of compounded as I got older. I went to, my parents divorced when I was 5, and we had this brutal custody battle, and it was child support and custody. And in a lot of ways, for the most part, my dad was really just on the defense. And when I was like 11 years old, 10 or 11, we went to a court-appointed mediator, and I'm sitting down and I'm talking with this mediator, and my little brother and I are there. And of course, the lady's like, okay, well, look, I'm here to help you out. I'm trying to just, figure out what's going on so I could basically help you in this circumstance. And whatever you tell us, is going to be safe with me, and I'm not going to tell your parents. So my little brother and I unload for an hour or two or whatever it was, and we tell her all the things that we think. We get into the waiting room, and then my mother goes in there, and it felt like an eternity. She was in there, and I'm starting to get this knot in my stomach. And when I remember it so vividly, when she walked out, she had this look on her face. She was fucking pissed. We get into the car, and she just unloads like, so you think this and you think that. So she basically, the woman told her everything that we had just said. Wow. Which was a powerful moment for me, because it really made me question the establishment and these court appointed, this is law. These are appointed officials working for the system. So that was a catalyst for me to question that. But then it was like another layer of like trauma and pain around the divorce between my two parents. And I remember all I wanted was my parents to be back together. And then I was in this position of making a decision as to which parent I wanted to live with, which is an impossible decision for a child. Like what I wanted was for them to be together, and that wasn't an option. And so, yeah, I kind of was like emotionally punished by my mother for wanting to live with my father, which was like deeply painful and caused me to kind of like retract a bit, and then maybe really lean on this idea of like, if I am, I don't know, perfect in whatever ways or what, as close as I could be to that, then I can get the experiences and the love and whatever that I wanted out of life, which were really not available to me. And ultimately, the feud between my mother and father was so brutal, and the approach that my mom took, I believe, was so deeply detrimental to her state of being, coupled with extreme pharmaceutical use. And she wasn't using pharmaceuticals necessarily recreationally. They were all prescribed to her, but she was deeply depressed, wasn't happy, and she ultimately ended up committing suicide. So there's these layers of like trauma, abandonment, unworthiness, whatever, and then like the ultimate form of abandonment. So I think I retracted, and I became much less willing to like express my authenticity to the world. Yeah. And becoming so passionate about Bitcoin and believing so deeply that this thing is a catalyst for immense change in the world, the kind of change that we all want. We want to see peace and abundance and love and prosperity. So that was like something that kind of really pushed me outside of my comfort zone. Like, I'm going to express my passion for this thing, and I'm going to do so digitally, and I'm going to just make these videos and share what I think about Bitcoin. And as a result of that, for the last like year and a half, I've been like riding this wave of pushing myself outside of my comfort zone, which has been deeply beneficial, healing in a lot of ways. I can say I've gone through like a deep transformation internally. I feel, I can say this now, which is kind of interesting and I guess vulnerable to say, but I'm like actually proud of the person that I am. And like, I've gone through this multi-year period of like accepting myself and being like, this is the only me that I ever have. Like, I'm never going to have another me. So I need to learn to love me. Right. And so, yeah, it's kind of, it's been a powerful journey for me. And I think I think a lot of people in Bitcoin have a similar transformations that take place. Yeah. There's something so deeply, it's something about Bitcoin that just really goes to the deepest depths of who we are as individuals and just are as a species. Yeah. That just aligns you with your I don't know, authentic self, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And thank you for sharing, and thank you for being vulnerable about that. I mean, I can't imagine. My mom passed away last year. She didn't take good care of herself. As I mentioned, she was, alcoholic. She finally did quit in the end, but I could just imagine that would be extra difficult had she taken her own life, so I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm sorry you went through that,
Well, interestingly enough, I think the only thing that we have control over in this world is how we respond to it. And although I wasn't responsible for her actions, by the time I was, 30 years old, I'd, kind of embarked on more of a spiritual path, and I was changing a lot of the ways I looked at myself or looked at the world. And I just took total ownership of who I was, where I was at, what I believed, what I had. And I like to think that, if you can do so, it's quite empowering. And although I would prefer to have my mother with me today, I do think in a lot of ways it was one of the best things that did happen to me, because it really forged a lot of things that I can say I am proud of about myself. Yeah. And so that's life happening for you, not to you.
Absolutely.
And it's just a perspective shift.
Yeah.
And at the very least, it allows me to feel better about painful circumstances.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ultimately it is all in how you respond, right? It's all you've got. It's basically how you respond. It's the whole Viktor Frankl final human freedom thing, where, the circumstances emerge. All you can do is respond, right? You can't control the circumstances, but you can control the response. And what else do we have? We got to build ourselves out of something. And we were talking about this earlier, right? With gratitude, that it's very easy. On my first ayahuasca experience recently, which I shared with you, and one of the core lessons was gratitude. Always come back to the gratitude. And it's very easy to do that when things are going well, right? It's easy for me to be grateful for all the good things in my life, especially when I'm experiencing them in the moment. That's the easy part. The very hard part, which I struggle with still, is to try and find that wavelength of gratitude when things are difficult. But all of your features, your characteristics, your strengths, all of these things that you've forged about yourself, you forged those in the fires of pain and failure and, misery and discomfort, all the things that you don't like. That's where you are actually made. You're not made, when you're succeeding and winning, it's like, okay, well, whatever you've got that's working is just working.
Well, and it can soften you, honestly.
And it can soften you. You can trend into like decadence, right? And it can corrupt you and all those things. But the real fortitude and the substance of who you are is forged in those fires. And so in reality, you should almost be more grateful for those things than your wins.
Yes.
Even though the inverse is the easy thing to do. And so I don't know. I really am trying, and I do find that life feels a lot better when you can do that, and it somehow also makes you more competent at dealing with whatever the problem is that's giving you the discomfort. Like if you can be grateful for the problem, even just a glimmer of gratitude, it helps me deal with it more effectively and get to that place of, how is this happening for me rather than to me?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a very deep lesson for me, and one that I'm still striving to try and implement into my life. One of the things I wanted to ask you about that experience is like, what you mentioned that your mom had like this vendetta against your dad. Like, what do you think, like I'm sure as a child you had a whole different perspective on it, but now in like the fullness of time and in hindsight, was it just a money thing? Was it, you said vendetta. Vendetta sounds like a lot more than just financial. Like It sounds like she had it out for your dad for some reason. Like if you had to try and if you tried to dissect it, I guess psychologically, like what do you think was going on there?
Well, so my mother ended up having an affair on my father, which was the end of the relationship. And she had, over the years, seemingly so, built up a narrative around the relationship to justify her actions. And it was something that she never deterred from. And so in some sense, it was this form of self-deception, self-delusion. And then for her to let go of that vendetta against my father, and it was the justification for her actions. Oh, he was angry, he was distant, he was unavailable. And in some sense, it was an admission of guilt, I suppose, that she was never willing to have or whatever.
It became part of her identity, maybe.
Totally. And it ultimately ended up killing her. Yeah.
Dude, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, honestly, it was deeply traumatizing in its ways.
Yeah.
I think we all have different flavors of trauma, some much worse than others, but it's all terrible for us, right? And so that was just my particular version of trauma. But I think that, by taking responsibility and ownership for your life and what happens and looking at like, how do you leverage the circumstance for growth, evolution, there's opportunity in everything, as crazy as that is to say. I mean, there's so many inspirational people walking the world sharing their message about, hey, this absolutely terrible thing happened to me, but now here I am as a result and I've learned these things.
Yeah. How did you alchemize all of that into becoming who you are? Like all that pain, all that, I'm sure a lot of psychological tension, as you said, right?
Yeah.
You love your mom, you love your dad, you want them to be together, but that's not an option. So you're torn between worlds. Like, how did you pull all that pain into something constructive for yourself?
Well, so we were talking about Bashar earlier.
Yeah.
I think what Bashar has to say is quite profound in a lot of ways, and he's quite good at explaining some of the spiritual, more metaphysical, and also just very scientific forces in which we're working with in this reality. And one of the things that he says that I absolutely just love, it's kind of like his nugget of advice to living a fulfilling life, is he says, act on your highest passion with zero insistence on any particular outcome, and a deep trust in knowing that whatever manifests itself as a result of acting upon that action is exactly what you needed. And so although I hadn't discovered Bashar or this thought process at the time, those circumstances led to me becoming a cannabis producer. And for me, every time I bagged a pound, for me, it was like a fuck you to Big Pharma. And like, I felt like my mother and other family members had been, victimized by the incentives that were built into the paradigm that the fiat paradigm, that regulatory moat, the corruption of the information. And so these people are suffering as a result. And so it was my purpose in a sense. And that trauma and the loss of my mother was the catalyst that caused me to do something that I otherwise would not have done. Yeah. Like producing cannabis 15 years ago, even though it was legal under medical laws, was like sketchy and not easy. And that then led me to Bitcoin. And so I'm really just like grateful for that, and like I went through my 20s drinking a lot. Oh, I drank so much, man. I on and off, and I would quit, and then I would start drinking again, and it would be like, okay, it'd be kind of once a week, and then it'd be every day, and then I would binge drink, then I'd get up, and then I'd sober up, and it was like this constant loop. And I as I started to go down a more spiritual path and listen to some of the great spiritual teachers, I did conclude for me personally, and I do see this in the world around me, and I don't think it's the only way it is, but I concluded that alcohol was the biggest hindrance for me to obtain and maintain a high vibrational state of being. Yeah, well it was said. This death blow to those positive vibes, that momentum you built. Yeah. And so quitting drinking, shifting my mindset, and then like, I felt really good about producing cannabis, and I was a high school dropout. I dropped out halfway through my senior year. I was like, fuck this, dude. This is, I didn't call it this at the time, but I clearly understood like, this is just busy work, a waste of my time. This is indoctrination. I mean, they're quite literally government indoctrination camps. And so I grew up in an area where a lot of my friends left the area. They went to nice colleges. They had fucking cool jobs. They're making money. And there I am, like fucking a drunk, pathetic 22-year-old guy. I was selling cars for this Toyota store. The 2008 financial crisis happened. So the economy took a big hit. Yeah. I wasn't in a position at that time to fully understand what was taking place, but I knew I went from making really good money for like 2 years to being broke. I had to move back in with my dad. Dude, at one point, this was right before I was invited to go up to Humboldt County, and I couldn't afford to pay my rent. And so I contacted my dad. What a humbling moment this was too. I'm like, Dad, I'm fucked, dude. And he was like, so ready to be like, yes, you are. And now you need to start taking my advice. And so he's like, you can come and stay with me. I got this real estate stuff. I'm building these houses. I'm doing whatever. Got the spare room in the house. I get to my father's house and I go look in the spare room, and the place is a fucking mess, man. I'm like, I can't sleep in the spare room. So I went to I rode my bike to a storage unit because I had got my car voluntarily repossessed. Couldn't pay my bills. Dude. It was like the most vulnerable fuck moment in my life at the time. I pulled a tent out of my storage unit and I went and slept in a tent in my dad's backyard, dude. Wow. In a tent in my dad's backyard for like 3-4 months until I could go up to Humboldt County and trim, and I never left. Good so it was just like this very, I don't know, humbling time in my life, And then I was super motivated to not be in that position ever again. And so I leveraged that to continue to work, and I'm very risk adverse, which is interesting for somebody who's been producing cannabis and also has a 100% allocation to Bitcoin. I sold my house and put my money into Bitcoin.
Which actually makes sense when you understand Bitcoin. Bitcoin is an extremely risk averse asset, even though it's not viewed that way. Obviously. How grounding, dude.
Yeah, what a trip,
you literally went and slept on the ground for 4 months to ground yourself.
Yes.
That's amazing, dude. How, your relationship with your father, like you mentioned to me out in the office, like that he was You used the word there-ness. He was always there, that he was consistent. He never missed. You mentioned your visitation frequency. He never missed a visitation. Like how was that influential on your life?
Well, so my father was writing child support checks directly to my mother. And at one point in the midst of and I think it was when I was like 13 years old. And now at this point, like we were going to move from my mother's to my father's. My mom is fucking pissed. And she's like clearly emotionally punishing us, my brother and I. And then she threw a fucking nuke at my father, you could say. She went to the district attorney and she said that, hey, he hasn't been paying me child support for the last 8 years. So immediately the district attorney suspended all of his licenses. He's an architect, so his architect's license got taken away.
Dude.
They took away his driver's license. And then he had to spend the next, I don't know, I think it took him 2 or 3 years to like clear that up and get all of his licenses back.
2 or 3 years.
2 or 3 years.
To clean up a lie she told about him.
Totally. Well, he had to prove that he had been writing her all these checks. And so he had to like dig through his bank records. And it wasn't, we weren't in the digital era that we are today where it would be as easy to do so. So the burden of proof was on him.
Wow.
And at that time, he had visitation with us every other weekend and every Tuesday night from 5 to 8 p.m. And he lived an hour away, but at that time with traffic, it was like a 2-hour drive one way. And through that period of time, so he's doing architectural jobs and he's paying, like he partners up with a buddy. He does the drafting. His buddy then puts the stamp on the work so he can continue to work. And apparently at one point, he tells me this, that his child support was more than what his expenses were, because the child support was put into effect based upon his tax income from a few years ago. The economy had changed. There was some sort of recession that had taken place, late 90s, something like that, he said. So he was actually playing blackjack. So he had read a book on blackjack and he would go in and he was, I don't know how he did this, but he successfully for like a year was able to earn the surplus he needed playing blackjack to pay the child support.
Holy.
And then he hired his friend every Tuesday night and every other weekend to drive him to come pick us up.
Wow.
And so that there-ness that I was speaking about, like he just took a brutal beating and then actually was with another woman who was his high school sweetheart he got back with, had 2 more kids, and then that woman and my mother colluded. So when the custody battle with my brother and I ended, he then went on another 10-year battle with the other woman that he had children with, in tandem with my mother's help. So it was this brutal process. But no, through the entire thing, he never wavered. Wow. He was always there. And so that was like a really important thing, I think. And without that, I don't know how things would have turned out.
Yeah. Wow.
But yeah, I mean, he's to this day, like, it doesn't matter the time of day, what's going on. Like if I call, if I need advice, he's there all the time. And that was like a very pivotal part of the whole chaotic time and experience for us. And something too that like I really have adopted, like that unwavering ability to do the right thing no matter fucking what.
Amen to
because
that.
That's all you have.
That's all you
and
got.
So, yeah, I'm just like talking about gratitude, like so grateful for his ability to do so. I think most people would have given up. Apparently his mother, my grandmother, like a couple of years into the whole process is like, dude, you just got to leave the fucking country, man. Yeah. This woman is going to destroy you. Right. And he's like, no, I'm not going to leave my kids. Like, I'm going to be there for him. And so, he went through a brutal process.
Did you?
And he's doing very well now. So I'm very happy.
That's great. Great to hear a happy ending for that guy. That, it kind of sheds new light for me, because growing up, I guess it's built into us. It's very easy to sympathize with a woman, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there's many times I think women have used their tears to earn my sympathy in a way that was manipulative. I'll just leave it at that without going into any specific details, but it seems to be a pretty common theme.
Yeah.
but as you tell this story, it's like it puts new light on it in a way. You're like, oh, well, maybe all these stories you've heard, not all of them, but some of the stories you've heard about the woman being, or being the victim or needing your sympathy. It's like, well, why not be the whole story, right? I heard it put one way that there's 3 sides to every story: his side, her side, and the truth. Mm-hmm. And so, I don't know. I just wasn't aware, my mom, God bless her soul, for all of her problems with alcohol and whatnot, I don't think she had this dark feminine thing in her. So like for all the problems she did have, when she was there, she was loving and good. You know, like the darkness she had was almost more like dark masculine, right? Like she wouldn't be there, or could be, verbally or like angrily, like not the manipulative kind of dark feminine side. And so what kind of a toll did that take on your dad? Like, did you see him? I mean, you probably didn't, maybe even at the time, you may have not known at first that your mom was having this vendetta and waging this, psychological war on your dad. Did that become apparent to you early on? Was this like in retrospect? Like,
yeah, it did. It was tough because, we would go to my dad's house, and my dad was pretty good about not talking about the problems. And he kind of, and he speaks to it to this day, that he just kind of wanted us to be away from it. But my mother had a narrative that she needed to continue to perpetuate.
Right.
And my mother was a beautiful and amazing, super intelligent individual. By the time she had passed away, she had ended up getting a doctorate degree and was a professor of sociology. Wow. And so while she was going through school, as I was growing up, we would go from Southern California to Utah, where my grandmother lived, and we'd go on these a 12, 18-hour drive or whatever it was. We'd have like deeply philosophical and spiritual conversations. And she was a sociologist, and she taught gender studies. It was a self-proclaimed feminist who ironically depended her entire life on men. Wow. So there was this very conflicted internal thing going on there. And I think that has something to do with the lunacy and the fiat paradigm and the detachment from gold in 1971. The broken incentives within the pharmaceutical industry, and then also the divorce industry and the child and custody thing. And, as opposed to going to an attorney that makes, whatever it was then, now it's $500, $1,000, $1,500 an hour. Instead of them just being like, look, let me help you solve this problem, there's an incentive for them to drag you through court.
For sure.
So I think that had a lot to do with it. Yeah, broken incentives, and
your
like
dad, was he like, did you tune into was he going through it at the time, or like was he always just showing the solid, strong face?
So he never drank any alcohol, has never done any drugs, doesn't smoke cigarettes. His problem was self-neglect and extreme, workaholic, but at the same time, like, he was doing the best that he could to just be there. And I think that he's doing really well now, but there was clearly some issues he had. He didn't have a father growing up. He didn't know how to embody his masculine role very effectively.
Gotcha.
And I think that had some things, something to do with why the marriage fell apart. But talking about, how things are happening for you, those issues sent me on a deep mission to understand that divine, masculine, feminine, symbiotic relationship. And then the conversations that I got to be a part of growing up with my mother about gender roles and femininity and the feminist movement, and kind of watching everything that's taken place over the last 20 years since she passed away has been quite interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, man, dude, that's a lot. That is a lot of different forces pulling you different directions.
But it was a catalyst for a journey of understanding and transformation that I honestly couldn't be more grateful for. I have a phenomenal relationship with my wife. Yeah. We have very natural female, male roles, and our energy flows really well together. And And I can say with the highest level of certainty, without the feud between my parents and the going through the circumstances that I did, I wouldn't have adopted that understanding, and wouldn't have become the person that I am.
Well, you chose to respond the right way, right? I heard someone say once that the origin story of every hero and every villain is the same. You know, there's some calamity early on in life that typically they have a great loss and they gain some great power. Yeah. But then it's like what they choose to do with that. And so, yeah, I think, but you have a beautiful family. Sounds like you've chosen the right path. So
I'm very grateful.
Yeah. Yeah. As you should be, man. Dude, I appreciate you sharing all that. Sorry if I'm digging into too much personal stuff, but I'm just so fascinated with the story and, the whole idea that everyone's dealing with something, man. Everyone's got some kind. This is where I've heard the importance of kindness be framed. It's like, try to be kind because everyone's struggling with something, man. And it is so true. It's like the older you get, the more you start to see that for what it is.
Well, and forgiveness is an important thing. I truly believe this, and this is kind of crazy to say in some sense, but I think everybody at all times, always, without exception, is doing the best that they can with who they are, with what they know at that time. Yeah. And so, everybody, somebody might do something totally terrible, but fuck, it's the best they had right then,
Yeah. No, that's. There's that idea with Plato that that all human action is aimed at the good, basically. Like people, that's what, Mises defined action, right? The purposeful use of means to pursue ends. So you're always trying to go from a place of less satisfaction to a place of more satisfaction, right? That's the idea with every purposeful movement through the world. But it just so happens, we're fallible and we're myopic and we have all these, we're prone to so many errors. And there's a whole process of maturation, right? We have to do all this trial and error in our own life, like running into proverbial walls here and there before we figure out which way to go. And to the point, I didn't know that about your mom, that she had the master's degree and all that. Like Doctorate. Intelligence does not equal wisdom, right? You can be the most intelligent person in the world and totally lack wisdom, and vice versa. Yeah. And there's, I don't know, I guess the through line between the intelligence and the wisdom is like, you need to have a lot of humility. Yeah. You need to have a lot of humility and understand what you actually are as a human. Yeah. If you want to learn and gain knowledge, or if you want to try and become more wise. Yep. And I don't know. It is a Socratic thing. It's like the older I get and the more I learn, like the less I realize I know, and the more foolish I realize I am. And I don't even know what to say about it. It's just like, it's this lesson you want to share with other people, but it's like, how can I share it with you? I can't verbalize it. And then there's also this internal awareness like, oh, but you're only this far on the journey. So 10 years from now, you'll probably be saying the same thing. Like, what am I doing now that myself 10 years in the future is going to say, oh, you were such a fool back then. How did you not know that? Yep. And this, like, I don't know if it's Bitcoin inspired, probably also becoming a parent inspired. Like I can't disentangle these two things because they happen for me at the same time. I got a Bitcoin tattoo like within a week of my daughter being born. So like these things were on top of each other. But the radical humility that I hope, and it sounds almost audacious to say that. I'm not saying I have achieved radical humility or anything, but I aspire to it now. It's not something I used to aspire to really. Yeah. I aspired for like strength and knowledge and wealth and whatever. But you kind of get far along that spectrum and you're like, wait a minute, I missed something here. Yep. And not pursuing humility, I made all these mistakes. Yeah. I did all these foolish things, or I was wrong about all these things.
I know what you mean.
And I just wanted to like package up that whole thing and like, here you are, young ones. This is what life is like. But you can't really do that. People just have to go on their own path.
Yeah. Well, it's, it's the journey. It's not the destination. Yeah. And all you have is the present moment. Yeah. And hindsight's always 2020. Yeah. I'm very interested, if I'm fortunate to make it far into the future, to look back and see what kind of things I'm dealing with now that that are in the blind spot that you could be unaware of. And
yeah. It's funny how all those fucking cliches become true, don't they? It's
yes. Like,
yeah. All the stuff my mom used to say to me all the time, but that I would just like, not all of it, but a lot of it, you know, she had these moments of wisdom, things she would repeat to me about me. Often saying like I could get into good situations or into really bad situations with my mouth. Like I was a talker, and she warned me about that early on, and she was right. I had to learn that the hard way. Right.
Yeah.
And, just I don't know, like a reverence and appreciation for elders, the wisdom of people that have actually lived this life, whether they took the right path, the wrong path, you know, a mixture of the two, as we all have. There is wisdom that comes out of that. That if you're young, I don't want to say, I don't want to make it an age thing. Like people that are older tend to have more wisdom, obviously, but be open to that. That would be the message, I think. Be open to the wisdom of elders or those that are more experienced, and be humble in your own knowledge, in your own direction in life.
Yeah. And I think also you have to embrace everything about life. You can't have sweet without bitter.
Yeah.
You have to have the duality of life, and what you resist persists. And if you want to transmute some of the worst things in your own life or in the world, you have to figure out how to adopt some sort of level of gratitude and love for them, and acknowledge the existence of some of the worst things, you know?
Yeah.
I think that we're eternal, limitless beings. And if you're eternal and limitless, then you want to experience limitation.
Yeah.
And so I think in some sense, that's why we're experiencing this. We're spiritual beings having a human experience.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if there's like a predetermined destiny that, you know, we've decided to experience for the evolution of the soul, but it kind of seems like that's the case. And so with that, I kind of just, I'm, and by no means am I a master at this at all, but like I definitely am experiencing a much more joyful life when I adopt these thought processes.
Yes.
And whether it's all real or not, I have no fucking clue, but like at least it feels good.
Right. That is the metric, basically. The joy. Yeah. The raw joy you're getting from life sort of indicates to you that you're on the right path.
And I think it's all probabilistic, and it makes the most sense to me. And it's like same thing with Bitcoin. It clearly makes more sense than the alternative monetary systems. And so that kind of spiritual perspective for me, there's a lot of parallels with spirituality and religion, and stories like the Anunnaki. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of the Anunnaki.
The Egyptian thing? I've heard of it, but I don't know the story.
Yeah, so I'll botch this because I'm not, an expert in the subject. But the idea is that the Anunnaki is an alien race that lives on a planet, Nibiru, that's just outside of our solar system. And there was some sort of a climate crisis taking place on Nibiru, and the way that they were needed to resolve that was by injecting gold into the atmosphere. So I think it's 300,000 years ago, long time ago. The Anunnaki came to Earth to mine gold. And what they did was they genetically modified the existing hominids on the planet to be more like them, but not be able to procreate.
Wow.
To be a slave race, to mine the gold so they could take it back to Nibiru to inject it in the atmosphere to save the planet. And there was two brothers. It's Enki and Enlil, and I can't remember which one of them was the one who was responsible for breaking the rules, the Anunnaki's rules. And what he did was he made a genetic modification in the Garden of Eden, which was a genetic laboratory, which apparently they had all over the world, and allowed us to procreate. And that was something that they weren't supposed to do. And so they ended up leaving. They got recalled back to Nibiru. And then now here we are, like half Anunnaki and half Homo erectus.
Yeah.
And then actually I was listening to something that just popped up on my feed the other day about talking just about this and how they're responsible to come in and check in on us. And so I had this kind of thought, like that'd be kind of perfect. This is wacky and out there, but like, what if there was an influence from the Anunnaki to help us discover a better monetary protocol so we don't fucking blow ourselves up here.
Wow.
Now that's super out there, but it's fun to think about.
But they would have presumably some kind of like lingering guilt maybe for making us mine gold, and then probably contributed to the monetization of gold.
That's an interesting one there. The
And
fascination
then they're
with
like,
gold.
you know, 2 centuries later, or whatever the number is, like, oh wait, these hybrid apes are just killing each other over the gold. How about we give them Bitcoin and stop all that nonsense? That's an interesting. Yeah, that's a damn good movie right there.
Yeah. And that's
a great movie.
There's a lot of information about it. You know, there's the Emerald Tablets, Billy Carson.
Yeah, I was just reading that with my daughter. Yeah.
So there's just so a lot
funny.
Of parallels.
My daughter used all the Egypt stuff recently, the discoveries of the pyramids and the structures beneath them and all that. We were just talking about it as it came up. And my daughter immediately just seized onto it. It was like became her instant fascination as soon as we started talking about it. She wanted to see pictures of it and like learn about it. And, you know, she hit, I guess she's only in kindergarten, so they haven't studied ancient Egypt yet. So asking about mummies and, you know, King Tut and all, like why they did it and what their worldviews were, like she just started going down the Egyptian rabbit hole. And so as part of that, I actually had Robert Grant on the podcast, who was big into ancient Egypt.
Great episode.
And he had recommended a bunch of books on Egypt, and I had them on my Kindle. So always, when my daughter's with me, I always read Kindle with her as we fall asleep at night. We always read the Bible. Yeah. But this time, first time ever, she's like, let's read something about Egypt. Dad, I want to learn. So I pulled up the Emerald Tablets. Strange book, man. Yeah. I don't even know what to make of it. It's just strange. I haven't read the whole thing, but
I haven't read it, but my wife has, and I don't think that they discuss the Anunnaki, but it's Thoth.
Thoth, which Grant mentioned a lot. And he is the same as who's the alchemical guy? Hermes. Yeah, Trismegistus, is that it? So Thoth and Trismegistus are the same person, supposedly?
I'm not sure on that one.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know either. But what fascinated me about that is how we didn't even give my daughter a lot of context. It was something magical about Egypt. Like as soon as the word Egypt came out, she was just like grabbed onto that idea. Like I'd never seen her grab onto an idea, and I don't know why.
Well, I don't know, but I do find these days that the narrative around the pyramids being built by slaves is now becomes like it's insulting.
It's debunked,
and then the idea of free energy technology, that's a funny one. Actually, I had this thought, like if there are powerful entities on planet Earth suppressing free energy, what kind of incentive do they have to use that to mine Bitcoin? And would we see it show up immediately in the hash rate?
That's crazy. You'd have to see it in the hash rate though, right?
So it's this, Bitcoin seems to be capable of exposing things to like, who knows what what extent.
Yeah. Cause if you had 0 point energy innovation, you'd have hash rate go towards infinity basically, right?
It'd be pretty incredible.
It would.
And I like to think that that's there, that it exists. I mean, we've heard a lot of stories that's, you know, common knowledge. Some guy figures out how to make a car that can run from California to New York on a gallon of water, and he commits suicide by shooting himself in the back of the head twice, you know? Right.
One of my highest health priorities is keeping my brain in top shape. To take care of my brain power, I do many things, such as striving to read, write, exercise, and meditate daily. One of the latest tools in my brain power toolkit is MindLab Pro. MindLab Pro is a nootropic supplement that is scientifically proven to enhance your brain power. When I take MindLab Pro, my mind feels like it has a better grip on the world, my thinking is more lucid, and the articulation of my speech is radically improved. MindLab Pro has been tested in rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled human trials and has been proven to enhance brain power for users in every age group. MindLab Pro is an advanced formulation of 11 nootropic ingredients and is backed by research from over 1,400 human trials conducted over the past 32 years. So if you're looking to enhance your brain power, MindLab Pro is an excellent solution. Go to mindlabpro.com/breedlove to start enhancing your brain power today. Again, that's mindlabpro.com/breedlove. Knowing when to buy Bitcoin can feel complicated, and knowing how much to buy can be overwhelming, and getting started can be a headache, but it doesn't have to be. That's exactly why I recommend Coinbits, because it solves these major blockers and it's the easiest way to buy Bitcoin. With Coinbits' Roundups feature, you can automatically convert your spare change into Bitcoin while you shop. For example, when you buy a coffee for $3.50, the extra 50 cents is rounded up and it goes straight into Bitcoin. Here's why that's a huge win for you, because you don't have to be a tech wizard or try to time the market just right with Bitcoin. With Coinbits Roundups, you simply set it, shop, and stack sats. And you can set this up in under 2 minutes. Just visit the website, connect your card, and boom, you're buying a little Bitcoin every time you spend money. So stop wasting your time with complicated exchanges or confusing shitcoin apps. Coinbits simplifies your Bitcoin savings strategy. So go to coinbits.app/breedlove. Again, that's coinbits.app/breedlove. What is I've thought about that too. I don't know what grade of conspiracy theorist I am actually. I guess I stopped short of the reptilian people dominating us. Like I think we're all the same species and it's just a lot of political manipulation and whatnot. But what would be the incentive if there were a 0 point energy where you could produce basically infinite energy for zero cost or near that? What would be the incentive of another human preventing humans from allowing that technology to proliferate? Because presumably they would benefit as well.
Yeah.
Like, why would you do that?
I don't know. It's the ultimate form of extracting from the populace, though. It's like the best way to possibly enslave people is to get them to pay for the most fundamental thing that they need, which is energy.
So you'd have to like be thriving on their suffering, something like that.
Well, that maybe then ties into this idea of the dark demonic forces and the reptilians or whatever Satan worshiping evil cabal pulling strings behind the scene, if that's a thing. But it seems to make sense. And then what Nikola Tesla, didn't he create isn't it common knowledge that he created a tower that was harvesting energy from the ether?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about my Tesla history. I heard he was aspiring to wireless energy transmission, but I don't know that.
Yeah. It's my understanding that he got there, but I could be wrong about that.
I can add to that.
Yeah.
He basically figured out a way to convey energy through surfaces like static electricity. So you wouldn't need cables. You wouldn't even need to put it through the air. It would be static electricity of the surface. So,
wow. Without harm.
That is a super simplification, but that's my best understanding.
And would that be harmful at all? Like if it's
no, it could just pulse through sort of standing static electricity.
Oh, that would be nice. We get all the wires out of the studio. Yeah. Well, no, it is interesting, but now, to your point, Bitcoin is this gargantuan financial incentive for anyone that is keeping the lid on something like 0 point energy. Well, now they stand to gain, trillions if they just use it, right?
Well, all the woo-woo speculation aside, it is quite literally paying our civilization to figure out how to create faster computing power and figure out how to produce energy at less cost.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is one of probably the most, I don't know. I'll just say one of the most underappreciated things about Bitcoin is that it's this global bounty program for cheaper energy production, basically. Compute power as well, but energy. Well, compute power now too is becoming a primary input to almost everything, but energy is definitely an input to every economic process. So the cheaper energy becomes, the more aggregate wealth goes up, basically. And so the fact that Bitcoin puts so much downward pressure on energy prices, not only is it giving us this ultimate sound money, this hyper portable, hyper concealable economic instrument to conserve that purchasing power, but it's also putting great upward pressure on purchasing power by making energy way cheaper and theft way harder. It just increases productivity tremendously. Yeah. And so I think people often appreciate the integral aspects of Bitcoin, that you can preserve purchasing power very effectively, but they're underappreciating how much upward pressure it puts on productivity and purchasing power.
Well, there's The energy thing, though, I think is controversial. And, you know, you have, I don't know, people like, it's my understanding, I could be wrong about this, but it's my understanding that XRP funded Greenpeace with this change the code, not the climate thing. And there are people have identified a problem. And the problem is that we are being extremely wasteful and abusive to our planet and our resources. And the response initially is well, we should use less energy.
Right.
And the reality is that every great breakthrough in human history has been a result of us figuring out how to channel and use more energy, not less.
Yes.
And so, yeah, but the incentive vortex that is Bitcoin, like I've stopped kind of worrying about this. Maybe I've just become delusional, but I've almost hit this state of like euphoric bliss where I'm just like, all roads lead to Bitcoin. And as long as this thing stays decentralized and secure, and it seems that with a high level of probability it will, the whole world in multiple layers, going back to that stack, is going to reorganize itself around it.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's excellent. Wonderfully said. And what a just great gratitude for being alive in the time of Bitcoin. I'm just like, what? We get to see this thing right as, you know, I remember right before it, and I'm going to, you know, knock on wood, live long enough to see at least the beginning of it. And if it is even, you know, a 10th or maybe even 1% as significant as we think it is, that's an amazing time to be alive. Like to see that event take place. And it's happening so fast.
It is. You know, and in some sense too, I feel like it's very healing, and it's almost like it's like up-regulating our genetic code.
Right.
You know, you have epigenetics, the environment that you're in affects the genetic expression. And as a cannabis farmer, that phenotypic expression, like I can take the same plant and literally, and I cultivate clones. Like you propagate seeds, you pick which one you want. It's like having 20 kids. You pick which one exhibits the traits that you want to mass produce, and then you clone that. I can take a clone and I can put that clone in different environments, and I can see a different phenotypic expression. Right. The physiology of the plant is completely different. And so if you remove a lot of these external forces, these how are the downward forces?
It's the nurture versus the nature, right? It's the, I guess epigenetics cause different genes to express based on the selection pressures of the environment. Yeah.
And so if you remove that incentive to violence, I mean, and I feel it myself. I had a significant gold position because it was the easiest thing for me to purchase with the cash that I had. And I remember the day I unloaded my last load of gold. I had to mail my gold off to a bullion dealer, and you know, they insure the package. You can only send so much at a time. When I got rid of all my gold and all of my cash, and it was all in Bitcoin in a multi-sig, I remember I was just like, conceptually, I knew how much better that was than having physical property. But I had spent 15, 17 years hiding my cash and then my gold and silver in different ways, because I needed, you know, at one point I had a large monthly nut to crack. So I had large amounts of cash that I would need to pay all the bills. So I would have different ways of hiding it. So I needed to access some of it so I couldn't bury it in a Pelican case. That was like my long-term reserve. So I had cash and gold buried in Pelican cases. But then I had stuff that I needed to have access with. And then you're hiding that differently from seizure and theft than you are from like fire, because I'm growing weed in these facilities, all this electrical use, like you could have fires. The moment that I got read of all of that, and it was all in Bitcoin, it was like, oh my gosh, like that is amazing. And then being concerned about the future state of the world, the last political regime seemed to be much more globalistic than nationalistic. I think Trump's seemingly more nationalistic, and it seems like we've definitely changed direction in a lot of ways. I'm still suspicious, but it all looks good at the surface level. But I spent a long time thinking like, okay, well, I might have to flee or move somewhere or whatever. I'm in California watching the state fall apart. Like, where am I going to go? And I remember thinking like, when it's time to move, like, okay, how am I going to move all my gold and silver with me? Right. You know, like, okay, well, if this is an issue, I can just leave the country. I can go wherever my Bitcoin can go with me. This hyper mobile, hyper liquid capital is, I remember I went to my wife a couple of years back. I'm like, maybe we need to change our strategy. Like, look, I have this put aside so that we can buy a house. Why do we want to buy a house? So we could raise our family, have a safe place to live, security, whatever. I'm like, well, the reality is I believe that we're more secure and safe if we rent and hold all our money in Bitcoin. If we need to go, we just leave. Like, and what we're going to leave hundreds of thousands of dollars and like millions of dollars in equity in some piece of real estate. Yeah. Like, you know, there's a lot of people who died because they couldn't take their stuff with them when there was a big problem taking place. Yeah. You know, not to mention the price appreciation. I think if you took the average $500,000 house and you put $50,000 down on that house, and then you got a fixed mortgage, and you compare that to the rent and the appreciation and keeping that down payment in Bitcoin, I think you get wealthier and you have a higher level of optionality. Now, I'm not adverse to home ownership, sure. But when you're in this position of like, hey, things seem sketchy, like where do I go? How do I hedge myself against that uncertainty?
Yes.
I have found personally that I like to rent a house and I have the Bitcoin. You know, I have 2 cars. I have some nice knives to slice my meat with. I have nice guns. Yeah. And that's kind of it. And like, if that can go with me. And then also like, fuck it, I can leave all of that, you know? And like the thing too, with Bitcoin that I found, I also care so much less about material stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, fuck it, it's just stuff, you know? Like I feel like so many people, and I did it myself. Like I like nice things. Yeah. And I grew up with enough abundance that I was capable of I had access to the nicer things in life. Yeah. And I used to really kind of like spend a lot of time and energy focused on keeping all of my stuff nice. Yeah. Now, by no means am I abusive towards things, but I'm less emotionally invested in them.
Yes. Yeah, that's the key, right? It's nice to have nice things, but don't get so emotionally attached to your possessions that they possess you.
Totally.
That's so interesting and it's so well said. And my mom, again, God rest her soul, she used to say, this is some redneck wisdom she used to drop on me. Stuff don't matter, people do. And I was like, she used to say that. I'm like, why do you keep saying that, Mom? Yeah. It's like, almost like a truism in a way. You're like, yeah, of course, people matter more than stuff. But then over time, I was like, oh, wait, there's this whole other dimension to human psychology where people really start to value the stuff over the people. And I would put, you know, central banking in that category and political, like all these like institutionalized forms of that love of money or whatever you want to call it. That's a really dark, dark thing. So as I started to unwrap this simple redneck wisdom, it started to speak more to me as I grew in my own knowledge and education.
Yeah.
I had to ask you about this because I don't know if this is a true story or not, but someone told me once that there was a grow operation somewhere in California and they had been having the banking impediment issues that you described earlier. You basically can't get banked, right? It's very difficult to get banked as a cannabis operation. Yep. I saw, this is back when I was a finance executive, but we were in finance technology. There were specialized financial technology companies coming to try to serve that market, right? But they would like bank you in the Caymans and give you some digital interface or whatever. It was a real problem. One of these cannabis operators responded by apparently stacking gold and silver. Right. So like they had a ton of fucking gold and silver, I don't know, on site or on some site. And apparently there was a fire at some point, like a very serious fire. And it fucking melted the gold and silver, like ran down into the soil. Wild. And they lost tens of millions of dollars.
Interesting.
And so I don't know. I don't know if it's true. So if someone can fact check me on it. I heard about that once. I just wondered if you had ever heard anything like that or if there was any. Have you ever seen maybe a cannabis operation taking advantage of Bitcoin in a unique way?
No, but there are people, and Paul, the CEO of Bifederal, has been working on something to do with dispensaries and finding dispensaries that have the product that you want and then some sort of payment layer with Bitcoin. I've had several people reach out to me over the last year and a half because I'm a cannabis producer and say that they're trying to implement some sort of Bitcoin Lightning payment system in with the dispensaries. I don't think very much of it is in effect and happening. I think that a lot of the issue is education. And then of course there's a taxable event. Most people are unaware. Like I love Strike. I'm in El Salvador in the farmers market and I could just put cash into the cash side of my Strike app and it converts it to sats and I have no taxable events.
Right.
But I do know people, lots and lots of people who have had theft issues, robberies, you know, that incentive to violence because of the physicality of stuff, cash. It's like, that's a real issue. It is a real issue.
Absolutely. So, I mean, there have got to be, maybe they're not so public about it, but there's got to be cannabis operators out there just stacking sats, right? Like
more nowadays, like there's a few that I follow on Instagram around the country that I'm like digital friends with that are getting into it. But you'd be surprised, man. It kind of falls on deaf ears. Like I've been running around. The reason that I am here is because I went to Pacific Bitcoin in 2023 because I was losing my fucking mind. I was running around yelling at the same 20 people for like the last 7 years about Bitcoin. A few of them are now orange pilled, but like I needed to meet Bitcoiners. And, you know, I'm hanging out at the conference, chatting with a bunch of people, and Matt Cratter, who is one of my absolute favorites with Bitcoin University, he was like, hey, you should make some content. Like, you got an interesting story. And so then when I got home, the conflict in the Middle East broke out, and I was like, okay, fuck, I feel like I should speak up. At the very least, I should, you know, I'm not going to sit back quietly. Like, I want to help push this forward, even if it's in the most infinitesimal way. Because, you know, this history of killing and stealing and just the whole death, plunder, violation of property rights. It's for whatever reasons, I want to help encourage the world to be more peaceful and loving.
For all the good reasons there are, right? I mean, come on. Did we not pile up enough corpses in the 20th century to fucking learn our like serious lesson that thing doesn't work? I guess there's a lot of people that might say, oh, well, we did fix that with a nuclear stalemate that we've enjoyed. You know, we've been peacefully slumbering under the shade of for the past whatever number of decades, 6 decades, I guess. No, 8 decades, right? Since the end of World War II. But I don't want to bet on that. I'm not satisfied with that. Like, oh, world peace has been attained because we're all aiming our nukes at each other. Like, that sounds fucking horrible. That sounds like, you know, the hair that breaks the camel back is going to break the species in that scenario.
Well, it's the kinetic power projection stalemate.
Yes,
and this is where Jason Lowry's work is so good. I absolutely love it. I don't particularly love the framing of it being a weapon necessarily in such a time
power projection technology, but a peaceful power projection.
But he's
technology.
right. I mean, it's a game theoretic economic shelling point. It's maybe not even just economic. It's a shelling point. It's like the discovery of gunpowder. You don't adopt it, you fucking die.
That's right.
At least economically.
Yeah. Man, I had the guy on, Brian Solston, that wrote the book that he thinks Satoshi Nakamoto is John Nash.
Really?
Father of game theory. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm struggling. Maybe Mike, you can remember the term, something like the permanent shelling point or the final shelling point, that John Nash had theorized something like this. And that was part of the argument he was using to make the case that John Nash was Satoshi.
Interesting.
That we could attain some like, shelling point of finality that would like organize world peace or something like that.
So what I like to think, and
he also talked about like asymptotically, now I'm forgetting it. Asymptotically perfect money, I think he called it, which obviously Bitcoin has the asymptotically exponentially decaying supply curve to zero in 2140, which sounds like that.
Which actually, that's an interesting one. We're still increasing the supply of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin's value in real terms is going down because of dilution. It's just being diluted at a slower rate than literally everything else on planet Earth. So its convertibility into anything or everything else on planet Earth is increasing because the supply is increasing at a slower rate.
And because of the perfect information. Right? It's like a fully diluted cap table. You know what the cap is. And you know the limits to dilution, basically. Yeah.
Well, and then ideologically, like it's something so profound. Like I can align myself with this 21 million units of digital money. Like it's so crazy, but it's like it's almost the most certain thing in this reality of limitless uncertainty. Seemingly so, or with the highest level of probability.
The framing I've tried to put around this before is that we've imported the integrity of the laws of physics into the socioeconomic domain.
Beautifully said.
And we need that, right? If we are these hominids that play games with each other, Well, the problem has been the rules getting rewritten and changed all the time, and all the politics and violence surrounding pursuit over the power of that rulemaking apparatus has been the self-destructive pretext from which we have not been able to escape. And so like maybe they were the fucking Anunnakis or whatever you said. Maybe they didn't bring us Bitcoin, or maybe God did. Or, I don't know, but we needed some divine intervention.
It's seemingly divine. I love Kaysen's, work and discussion about it being messianic.
Yes.
I think about simulation theory sometimes, and the idea that with technological advancement in virtual reality, that it's logical to think that at some point, whether it's 5 years or 5 million years from now, that we would be able to make a virtual reality that is indistinguishable from base reality.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then it's actually not probable that we live in base reality.
Yeah.
So in some sense, if this is like a simulation that we're projecting ourselves, or that we're in, however that is, when Satoshi wrote the lines of code and released the white paper in Bitcoin, he fundamentally updated the simulation.
Yeah.
And we are now playing in a fundamentally different reality. Like the fabric of this reality is different than it was. That's why I call it the BB era. For all of known history, the world is now different post 2009.
Yeah. Yeah. Software update metaphor, I think, works really well, right? A moral, economic software update, a monetary software update, a moral software update, time preference software update, like all these things, all this informational substructure that we run on but don't think about a lot, seems to somehow get a little bump in the right direction from Bitcoin. And it's radical, man, to say the least.
Yes.
In the true sense of the word, radical meaning to the root. Bitcoin goes to the root of a lot of matters, and I guess that's why it's a fucking rabbit hole, right?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I heard you say a long time ago that I love so much is money is half of every transaction.
Yeah.
And if the money is corrupt, then that has an effect literally on every facet of life.
Yeah.
And another thing Booth says is you can't have an honest society built on a dishonest ledger.
Yeah.
We have an honest ledger.
So
we're all playing the same economic game. Like the Bitcoin network ushers in the first global free market. The natural state of that free market is deflation.
Yeah.
So that means that things are, and they already are, is just, you just can't see it. Things
are
getting cheaper.
Yeah.
You just can't see it.
Yeah.
We're measuring things in another moving unit. The algebraic equation is incomplete. And how many people are measuring the value of their house with the adjustment of M2?
Yes.
And if you did that, then you would see, oh, wait a second, my house actually isn't going up in value.
Exactly.
And I got a 4% or 6% or 8% mortgage plus 1% maintenance cost, 1%, 2% real estate tax. I'm actually losing money owning this house, but in nominal dollar terms, it seems like I'm getting wealthier.
100%. Bitcoin, this is maybe harkening back earlier, where I was trying to ask you, what is it about the psychedelics and Bitcoin that let us take that metacognitive step back and therefore improves our thinking?
Yeah.
Broadly speaking, I don't want to say it gives you wisdom. I don't want to say it gives you intelligence, but at least reframes, right? It helps you reframe. Maybe that's it, because it does the reciprocal to number go up technology. Like everyone knows Bitcoin's price goes up, but if you just reciprocate that and say, oh, well, let me look at it from the other way. Oh, that's the price of everything denominated in Bitcoin going down.
Yep.
If you denominate houses in Bitcoin, the housing prices are down 99% over the past 10 years.
Totally.
Or more, right?
Yeah.
Or you say that out loud. Housing prices are down 99% over the past 10 years. Everyone's like, get the fuck out of here. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
They're expensive. And it's true. It just depends on what your frame of reference is. And so maybe that's what Bitcoin teaches you, the essential nature of framing and rationality, that you always have to consider the aperture through which you're viewing the thing through as part of what you're seeing.
Yeah. Yeah. With Bitcoin, like I said, listening to the Booth series and the Sailor series helped me to be able to really clearly wrap my head around what I was experiencing personally in my life and what I see taking place in the world. And that's that we do live in a deflationary world, and the debasement of the currency is bifurcating the society, rewarding the property owning class, a lot of which are productive. But then once you, like we discussed, hit make enough money, essentially, then now you're having to manage that money in what is a zero-sum game. Yeah, you can see that through the lens of Bitcoin. It's kind of like, so I did LSD for the first time, like, I don't know, 2 months ago. And it was like, whoa, this whole thing is all energy and vibration and frequency. And like, you know, so it kind of, that's part of the, I think the parallel between Bitcoin and psychedelics where like, hey, we live in, you know, Tesla said, you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, vibration, and frequency. And scientists now are like, you know, they keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper to see what the building blocks are that make up this reality. And it's energy. It's just empty space.
That's right. Yeah. This is so true, man. Like all these things are converging, right? Even in quantum physics, there's no particles, basically. Like there are all these theoretical zoo of particles, but what there are actually are real relations between energy patterns and probability patterns. And that's what we see kind of at bottom. It's not things, it's not stuff, it's not substance, it's relationality, basically. And
so the double slit experiment is so profound. The observer is what causes the wave to collapse into a particle. So at the very least, we know that the observer has an effect on reality. If you take that a little bit further, you could say that the observer is literally creating reality. I don't know what's the case there. I'm not a physicist, I'm just a dude who's been growing cannabis and become passionate about Bitcoin. But that understanding has caused me to be very mindful about what I visualize for the future. You know, I went through a period of time where I was really concerned about a 6102 attack. You know, I remember it was actually right after I got back from Pacific Bitcoin in 2023, and I'm sitting in my sauna, and I just got hit with this tsunami of anxiety where I'm like, holy shit, like this is a monumental threat to the existing system, the powers that be, banking bloodlines, whatever it is. Like I felt like this deep anxiety. And so I started to think more deeply about that. And I think probabilistically, it makes sense that the world capitulates into the Bitcoin vortex and that the people who are in charge don't fight it the way that we're concerned they will. I think the thing that caused the corruption in the world is the same driving force that's going to cause these people to just adopt the Bitcoin standard. They're going to serve their self-interest. And I think very, very quickly, the people who are dishonest, who try to corrupt in whatever ways, are going to get blown up so quick. And so with that, from a logical and probabilistic perspective, I'm like, okay, well, I think things are going to work out in a positive way. But from a more metaphysical, spiritual, or woo-woo perspective, I'm going to just really visualize things working out in the right way.
For sure.
Like, if quantum physics is a real thing and we can pull an experience out of the quantum field, like I want to visualize the one that I want. You know, and it's like, we were talking about this earlier too, where like some people that have a victim mentality, they're exuding that victim vibration or whatever it is. It's that vibrational frequency being mirrored to you in the world around you. They're attracting more of that. And so I try really hard to be conscious that I am not falling into a state of fear. I think a lot of times people, they make decisions out of fear disguised as practicality. And discerning the difference between the two can be a challenge. But yeah, I try to make sure that I'm not falling into that fear-based, cortisol-induced state of being or way of thinking, because I at least am aware of the fact that it's possible that by feeling that way and thinking that way that I could bring myself more of that. And so I try to focus on, and it's probabilistic. And it seems to be happening like, hey, we're moving in the right direction. And so, you know, let's at least fuel the outcome that we want with our energy, our attention, our focus.
Dude, it's beautiful. It's beautifully said. So many things. I mean, just the idea, if it is energy, frequency, and vibration, that obviously whatever resonance you tune yourself to is you're going to draw that music into your life. Right. Whatever it is. If you're out there beating people up, live by the sword, you're probably going to die by the sword. If you're out there pretending to be a victim, you're probably going to get victimized maybe that's back to gratitude, right? Like, what is the highest vibrational state? Love or gratitude? As you said, you described gratitude as loving everything, right? And man, it's so easily said. Maybe not easily said, actually. It's kind of hard to elaborate on all that. in some ways, but even more difficult to do.
Yeah.
You know, like the human dark side and our own self-deception. And like you just said, between acting out of fear, but disguising it as practicality, I think you put it.
Yeah.
Like that's a subtle distinction where like you could easily think, oh, I'm just doing what's practical.
Right.
And not see the layers beneath you in your own stack, your own psychology or psycho-spiritual stack.
Yep.
That there's something deeper telling you this is practical, but it's actually part of you that you've bottled up for 50, you know, whatever the thing is. And so we're constantly, as these finite sapiential creatures, right? We're seeking the wisdom of what that is, but we're always failing in the process. Like it's this long process of trial and error. And dude, it just gives you so much, again, back to the humility. Like that's life. Like you just like try to do what's right and practical and true, but know that it's going to be a serious challenge and accept that, embrace that.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's easy to do it. And again, easy to say in a moment, but there's those times in life where I'm just pulling my hair out or wanting to cry or I'm angry and just like, that's when I wish I could take this and get a hold of myself, you know?
Well, those are those moments that I listen to, you know, Bashar's advice, you know, just trust that what you're experiencing is exactly what you need to be experiencing. And that kind of can remove that discomfort around whatever challenges that we experience.
Yeah.
Another thing he says too is that the universe is unconditional. So if you go through life thinking that things are hard, and I suffered from that too. I thought that I had to work really hard and to be really hard.
Yeah.
And then I also found that I started to grow resentment towards the people in the world that I saw navigating through life successfully and easily. Whereas like that was something that I had to change within myself. Like it doesn't have to be hard. And I think that's the meaning that we that we put on things.
Yes. That's a great point. That's a great point too, because I still suffer from, not suffer, but I still do that. I still do think life is hard and I try to work really hard. And I don't know. What you said earlier about your father too, about the bad side of him being self-negation or maybe not taking care of, like, and
a little bit of a victim thing too. That was something that I kind of learned. Like he was a chronic complainer, which I adopted. I used to just fucking bitch and about everything, dude. I did. Yeah. I was a complainer.
And I've had people that I've judged like, oh, they're a complainer, I don't want to be around them. But then I've also caught myself being that guy too sometimes. And that's another thing that's hard. Like,
well, and it's vibes. Oh, that's bad vibes. Like that ties
but
right
sometimes
into
you're going through some bad shit. And like, you know, like where's the line between venting and complaining? Like sometimes you need to blow off steam or whatever. Not blow off steam. Share with other people, basically. Like process it externally with dialogue. But then at some point, if you just keep repeating the same and complaining about the same thing, you're like, hey, bro, it's time to like resolve this or stop talking about it.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know. Life is a trip.
It's magical.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like the shifts that I've been experiencing over the last 5-10 years are just, it's like I have a buddy who says, and he's a hardcore Bitcoiner, hardcore maxi, maybe a little toxic at times, but in a good way. And he's like, hey man, we're spiraling upwards forever. And I feel like that there's something really deep behind that I resonate with.
That's a beautiful, beautiful place to bring it to a close. Spiraling up forever. I love that. Try to use that one in my next moment of weakness. Stacks, man, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, man, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, thanks for joining me here in Miami. This has been awesome, wide-ranging, philosophical, really good stuff. Where can people find you on the internet?
I'm on Twitter. It's Eric, ERIC V Stacks. Eric V Stacks.
Awesome, dude. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money. And be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.